Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this morning's meeting of the Budget Performance Committee, our last meeting, actually, of this Assembly year. Can I just ask everyone to make sure that your mobile phones are turned off and set to silent to avoid any interruptions? And can I ask our clerk, Hannah Barlow, if any apologies have been received?
Thank you, Chairman. Apologies have been received from Assembly Member Polanski and Assembly Member Wilson. Assembly Member Desai has also given his apologies, for whom Assembly Member Small Edwards is attending as a substitute.
Welcome. Declarations of interest. Can I ask the committee to note the recommendations set out at item 2 and ask if members have any other interest to declare? And can I ask the committee to confirm the minutes of the meeting held... let me try that again. The minutes of the meeting of the committee held on the 25th of February 2026 to be signed by me as a correct record? And can I ask the committee to note the completed and ongoing actions arising from its previous meetings and additional correspondence received? And can I ask the committee to note the recent actions taken by me as chairman under delegated authority, namely to agree in consultation with party group lead members the letter to the Mayor of London relating to the Mayor's draft consolidated 2026-27 budget as attached at Appendix 1? Good, we're nearly there. And can I ask the committee to note the following responses to committee outputs? Number 1, from the Commissioner of Transport for London to the committee's report, Euston, we have a problem, mind the funding gap, attached at Appendix 1. Number 2, from the Mayor of London relating to the 2026-27 Greater London Authority Group Budget, GLA Group Officers, as attached at Appendix 2. And from the Mayor of London relating to the Transport for London 2026-27 budget, as attached at Appendix 3. Good. With all that important business out of the way, we now come to the small matter of Oxford Street redevelopment, for which we are joined by Nabil Khan, who is the Chief Executive of the Oxford Street Development Corporation, by Adam Barrett, who is the Chief Finance Officer of the Oxford Street Development Corporation, by Helen Kancic, who is the Head of Investment Planning for Healthy Streets at TfL, by Phil Graham, who is the Executive Director for Good Growth at the GLA, and by Elliot Ball, Director of Group Finance at the GLA. Welcome, one and all. So why don't I kick off with the first question to you, Nabil, which is, when we look at this whole project, we're looking at a total budget of something like 144 million. What will Londoners get for that money?
Thank you very much, Chair. And can I just say thank you very much for the Assembly, for inviting me today. I was last in front of the Assembly 7 years or so ago, so I look forward to resuming our relationship. So a very good question. What will Londoners get for the 144 million? Well, the 144 million is, of course, for Phase 1, as we call it, of the Oxford Street regeneration project. So this is following the sort of mayoral decision to pedestrianise Oxford Street West. The 144 million will be the capital programme that sets out over the next 5 years how we deliver that.
So this is the section, the west, what's now being called West Oxford Street. So the pedestrianisation of that is what the 144 million delivers, essentially.
Yes, indeed. So it's from Orchard Street to Great Portland Street. Thank you, Phil.
I didn't think that was a trick question. I thought that was an easy opener.
Yes.
So in terms of sort of people who live and work locally, of which I was one a few years ago, what will the day-to-day progress of the work look like as it happens? Obviously, you say it's going to take 4 or 5 years to get through that phase.
Yeah, sure. So at the moment, we're obviously at design phase. So we've just completed the consultation. TfL has just completed the consultation. We are currently working up the design programme, and that will, of course, work out exactly the detail of the implications for people that live locally, but also people that visit, but also people that work in the vicinity. Exactly how the servicing is going to work, exactly how the pedestrian flows will work, exactly how some of the modelling will work around that. And that's going to be sort of worked up as part of the design that the 2 design teams are working on at the moment. And of course, that will give us much better indication of exactly the implications. What I would say is that we would fully take into account, as part of the consultation responses that TfL have received, and as part of our ongoing engagement with local stakeholders, we'll fully take into account some of the specific concerns and any mitigations that we need to put in place. We'll be putting them in place.
Okay. The timeline on that is roughly what, when we'll see the kind of programme and the detail of what's happening?
The design programme. So it's emerging. We have to take the board through it initially. So I think at the moment we've taken the board through design principles just a couple of weeks ago, and we're working at pace, is what I'd say. So the mayor's been very clear. He wants to see the road essentially traffic-free by summer. So we're working at pace at the moment. The designs are currently underway, and as soon as the board can get a chance to sort of sense check them and test them, we'll then be in a position to share.
By the summer, as in 3 months' time?
But I think the mayor's has said he wants it traffic-free by the end of August, I think he said.
Okay. And you talked about local stakeholders. Obviously, one of the dynamics of this, if you like, is that Londoners across the board tend to think it's a nice idea to have it pedestrianised. Some of the people locally are a bit more sceptical. One of the questions that's arisen is, in responses to the consultation that we had before, do we actually have a breakdown of what the responses were like, specifically from people who live in that area or in Westminster?
So this is in relation to the recent highway changes consultation?
Yes.
Yes. I may bring in Helen, my colleague from TfL, on that point, if that's okay.
Good morning. So we have in our consultation report a map which shows the stated postcode of everybody who responded to the consultation. What that shows is a high concentration of people who state that their postcode is very close to the area of Oxford Street. The majority of people who responded were Londoners, and then a number from outside of London. So in the consultation report, there is a map which shows that. We don't segment our results by postcode. It's important that we understand what everybody is telling us about our proposals. So there is more information in the consultation report.
I mean, you do segment it by ethnicity, for example. So that's an example of you being interested in what some groups think, not just everyone. But you don't segment it by what the people who live within, say, 500 metres or within 1 kilometre think.
So we don't segment the results by ethnicity. We look at all of the different demographic characteristics that respondents are willing to share with us, and it's not obligatory for you to share your protected characteristics when you respond to a TfL consultation. But we do look to understand where people are responding from, and also any protected characteristics or any specifics around disability, age, background. But we don't then analyse the results according to those groups.
Understood. But in terms of proximity, so you have the data that would allow you to say people within 500 metres, let's say, or people who lived within Westminster wards, or people who live within proximity to the proposal. This was the balance of their responses. You have that data, but you've chosen not to publish that data.
No, we haven't chosen not to publish it. Our standard approach for any consultation is to look at the totality of what people are telling us about our proposals. It's important that we don't prioritise any particular group of people over another group of people. And so our interest is in what people are saying, not who they are.
Okay, so that's just because this question has come up before, and it sounds like we've reached the end point of it, and the end point is TfL. You do have the data, but there's a policy that you do not publish it, so there'll be no way of ever knowing what the balance of responses was. Let's say people who live locally versus people who are across the whole of London.
No, we don't publish that, no. Okay.
Probably back to you, Nabil. So in the strategic case, it talks about Oxford Street and the immediate surrounding area contributing something like £25 billion to London's economy. How much will that go up or down by pedestrianising the western section?
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. It's a very important question because, of course, that is the entire purpose of this. So, although, of course, the focus on pedestrianisation is critical, there is a wider regeneration case that we're working to here, and Oxford Street's redevelopment and regeneration and economic transformation will lead to that. So GLA Economics did do a study to accompany the overall business case for the MDC, which is out in the public domain, and it's very clear in that it estimates that pedestrianisation could increase GVA by approximately £82 million per year. It could support a further 781 jobs. It could raise £30 to £40 million in additional VAT receipts, a really important point. The Exchequer will directly benefit from this. And, of course, £10 to £20 million in additional business rates annually. So it goes to show just the scale of the economic benefit to not just Westminster, not just London, but actually UK PLC. So
So some of those, I did detect the word might or could or up to in there. So I suppose what I'm picturing in my head is something like one of those fan charts, let's say, that the BOE produce. And I'm picturing, a central scenario of this is what we think is likely. And obviously there are some very optimistic scenarios, which is where all those coulds and mights and may wells turn out to be true, maybe even higher than that. And obviously then there's a pessimistic scenario where things don't pan out quite that well. So is that the way that you're looking at this? And if so, is there a sort of central scenario that you think this is what we realistically expect to achieve in terms of additional economic activity?
Indeed. I'm sure, as you appreciate, Chair, all economic forecasting and modelling is done according to models, and I think what GLA Economics have very prudently done is they've put these estimates out there, which is based on a central scenario. So it could, you're absolutely right, be higher than this. I think a lot depends.
I did also say it could be lower, just to make sure we're not.
I think a lot depends on, to be perfectly frank, on the design of the scheme. One thing I'm hearing loud and clear from current stakeholders, so current retailers, landowners, in the discussions I've been having is, of course, the high quality nature of the public realm will significantly impact on actually where we land on this economic forecast that we're presuming as part of the GLA Economics report. So it's quite important. The design takes into account, actually, it will have a major implication on the kind of place that we want to end up with at the end of it, and what that will result in economic returns.
And presumably that place where, let's say for the sake of argument, there is a X percentage increase in GVA business rates, footfall and so on, that would all obviously be occurring at the end of this programme, which I think we're assuming is like 2030, 2031 when this first phase is complete. So that's when that would be occurring. Is that right? So
it's a 5-year capital programme as set out in the Mayor's budget. I think the economic uplift we're already seeing, to be perfectly frank. So I think one of the things I'm sure we'll come on to is how we're going to monitor success. And there is a monitoring framework that's currently underway, and I can talk a bit about that in a bit if you like. But actually what we're already seeing is there are capital flows going into Oxford Street as a result of the MDC being established, because it's given investors confidence that change is going to happen. So actually, and if you look at a couple of the retail announcements over the last couple of weeks alone, so Warner Brothers just announced they'll be taking on a new 21,000 square foot flagship retail store in Oxford Street to open later this year, and we actually are in active conversations with them already about what that could look like. And of course, Liverpool FC announced last week that they will be opening their first flagship store outside in London on Oxford Street later this year. So I think that gives you a real sense of the investor and the retailer confidence that's already we're starting to see out. But you're absolutely right. What we should look at is the whole life assessment of this, and that will only be clear at the end of the programme.
Okay. I think on this committee we quite like to have a sense of where things are going at the start rather than at the end. So are there going to be more detailed forecasts from your point of view about what you think success? Because you appreciate where I'm coming from, which is that there is a tendency sometimes with these things to shoot an arrow and then paint the target around it afterwards and say, that's exactly what we meant to do. So we quite like to have a sense of what we're aiming at before we start aiming at it.
Just to confirm, quite so. The monitoring framework will set out some of the KPIs that we will measure ourselves against. So, and that will include everything. That will include everything from economic sort of metrics all the way through to public realm metrics, pedestrian flows, safety. It will have a whole suite of metrics that we measure success against. And I think the other thing that we should do fairly urgently, which I've asked the team to look into, is actually we should start capturing some of the economic uplift that we know is already taking place. So we need to find a way of sort of just capturing that from the moment the MDC was announced, because actually that's going to be really important to demonstrate the success of this.
Okay, and then so if this is all going to be, at least the first bit of the closure is going to be in place by the summer, presumably the KPIs will be out before the summer?
Yes, so at the moment the monitoring framework's being sense checked with the executive committee, so my top team, and then we will be taking it to board in May. To sense check it with the board and make sure that they're comfortable with what we're proposing. And all of this will be public, of course. So the moment the board signs it off, it will be public, and that will be how we will be held to account. And we would welcome that, because it's important that we show transparently exactly how we are monitoring progress and changing Oxford Street.
Great. And then just final question from me then. One possibility is that there will be a dip in economic activity while the building works are happening, because obviously they'll be disruptive in various ways. Is that something that you're anticipating or that you're incorporating in your plan?
So we are incorporating that in our plan. I think any sensible risk management approach should account for that, particularly when it comes to construction, particularly when it comes to the impact it could have in the run-up to Christmas season in particular for retail. So that will all be factored into our risk management approach. It'll be captured in our risk management register, and we'll put in place effective mitigations for that. But it's a very valid point. It's something that we'd be alive to.
Okay, so then so it is possible then that during the next few years we could actually see a dip in Oxford Street activity. I realise you've given us a very optimistic pitch, as of course has the mayor, but the reality of it is there could be, with all the building work, there could be a dip, and that's anticipated in your plan.
I think what I'm saying is that we would plan for the worst, as any chief exec should do, and any top team should do. But actually, what we're hearing from investors, from retailers at the moment, is that's not likely to happen. Actually, the confidence is there that given that this is going ahead now, if you look at some of the leasing activity that's taking place, if you look at some of the reports that are being produced by the likes of Savills, CBRE, JLL, they are predicting there's going to be a real upturn. So we should plan for it, because it would be irresponsible not to plan for it. But that's not what we're expecting at the moment.
Okay, Assemblymember Hall.
Thank you. Morning, everybody. Questions really to Helen, if I may. We constantly hear the term transparent. The mayor is going to be the most transparent mayor we've ever seen, and all that. And I've just heard it from Mr. Khan. We're hearing loud and clear from residents that they're very unhappy about this. So why can't we have proper published details about the consultation? Why can't we know the postcodes of the people that have, or the number of people, and the problems coming from specific areas? That's the first bit. How many people responded to the consultation?
Good morning. So 2,700 people thereabouts responded to the consultation. There is details in the report. About 1,800 of those are what we would classify as individuals. The remainder came from stakeholders. There were 83 stakeholders, which did include residents' associations. They are all listed in our consultation reports with the specifics of what each stakeholder responded on. And then we had two campaigns. One was from the London Cycling Campaign, and one was a campaign around a request for electric buses. And they comprised the remainder of the responses. But those campaigns also generated individual comments specifically about our proposals.
But people are asking for more detail about the consultation, and you're saying you're not prepared to put it out there. Why can't you be as absolutely open and as honest in all of it, and let us know the good and the bad and the detail?
So there is extensive detail in our published consultation report. I don't know the number of pages, over 100. We have set out, so when we analysed the responses, we asked two open questions. The purpose of the consultation was to gather feedback, thoughts, and an understanding of what people felt about those proposals, good and bad. We received, for the first question alone, 14,000 individual comments. We categorised those into around 200 themes and responded, and they are all set out in a very extensive table in that report, which says what people felt and what our response was, good and bad, and good ideas and thoughts around all different aspects of using that space. One of our limitations of analysing right down to postcode level is that does risk confidentiality, particularly if you've only got one or two responses from a particular postcode. We have to protect people's identity and their individual right to respond confidentially. So, but as I said earlier to Assembly Member Garrett, our priority is to understand the collective view of what people feel about our proposals, and that's the approach we take in every consultation that we undertake.
Okay, so given that we are hearing from local residents, they're very unhappy. So what's the view for people that live within half a mile radius?
So I don't have that information because we don't undertake the analysis at that level of granularity. We look at everybody's responses.
A mile?
We do not
So basically
analyse
then you don't know what the
location.
locals are thinking.
We do, and we have good representation and excellent engagement with the Residents' Association. Some of that information is set out in the consultation report because they've provided that formally. We've also, there's also a list of every meeting that we have held. Many of those are with local residents. But we do have to recognise that, like every scheme that TfL delivers, Oxford Street is serving a very wide community of people beyond the local residents. So it's important that we consider all of those views, people who are working there, people who are visiting, as well as people who are living. But I feel, as I said, if you look at the map in the consultation report, I feel that we've got a really strong representation and understanding of those local residents because they have responded proactively to the consultation.
Yeah, I do feel we'd have had a better understanding if it had been a mile, half a mile away, to get some idea as whether the information we're hearing, as in people are very unhappy, is actually there. I'm sure people that live 10 miles away don't mind what happens there at all. But people that are actually living in the area are telling us how unhappy they are. And so that's what we're paid to do, represent people that live in the area. And you don't have granular detail on a radius, half a mile, because that would give us some indication of just how unhappy local people are.
I understand that. I've explained what we've got. There is some really good information from local residents.
No, but if
they dropped into our drop-in sessions. We spoke to a number of them, and we've met a number of them. So we are taking their concerns seriously. We are considering their concerns in the plans as we develop. We'll particularly consider how we construct the scheme and the impact on local residents, as we would with any transport scheme. So I feel that we have a good handle on local residents' views, along with a lot of other people's views on this scheme.
I'll leave it at that for the moment, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Roberts.
Thank you and good morning. I'd like to continue that particular line of questioning, if I may. I also sit on, I've mentioned before, I'm sure I've sit on the Royal Parks Board. When we launched our movement strategy, which had similar impacts for residents living close to Bushy Park, Greenwich Park, Richmond Park, we published the data based on proximity to the park. And it gave a clear outline to people. And yes, there were people who lived close by who were not happy at all. But it was open and it was transparent. The problem I think that you have at the moment with this reluctance or refusal even to give a more granular detail, and I'm sorry to say that two people living in the postcode could easily be identified because they live in the postcode doesn't stack up. If you don't put their name and address, if you just use their WC2A, then that will be enough. But at the moment, by not publishing the data, it suggests that the people who live closest to are up in arms. They're apoplectic. They don't want this. I'm in favour of the scheme, by the way. I'm not a detractor. But you're not doing yourself any favours, I would suggest, by not being as open and transparent as you possibly can be with the data and allowing people to draw their own inferences. What you're doing is you're creating inferences for people to draw by not being open and transparent with the data.
So if you read the report, as I say, there is a huge amount of granularity in that report. It is an approach, the consultation approach that we take is consistent, and I think it would be very inappropriate for us to take a different approach for this particular scheme. Our responsibility as a Transport Authority is to be consistent with the way that we engage with people. There is a lot of detail in the report. Please, I would welcome Assembly members to read it. Set aside an afternoon, it's very long. We have covered everything in that report, and from that you can really pull out the concerns that specifically relate to local residents, and hopefully we've taken those into consideration with our designs and through our separate engagement with those residents' associations. So I believe that there is good transparency. We are consistent with the way that we deliver consultation with Londoners, and the we're really proud of the consultation that we undertook for Oxford Street, because I think it really delivers clarity and an understanding of what people feel and about the scheme, what impacts it will have and what benefits it will have.
Okay, the one counter I would add to that, and I'm not expecting a response, is that just because something in the methodology of reporting is inadequate in the past, it doesn't mean that you should continue with that inadequacy going forward. There always has got to be an inflection point, a point of change of how you do things. And I would suggest that the way it's being done at the moment is inadequate, and now is the time for change or looking at change. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, moving on to our next section, which is on funding and revenue. Assembly. Oh, sorry, I didn't see. Sorry, I thought you were coming in late. I do apologise. In that case, Assembly Member Mahfouz.
Thank you very much. Just to continue with the theme of change, so this is very much about delivering significant change at Oxford Street, but for not just for Oxford Street, but for London. We've heard, obviously, earlier from yourself, Nabil, in terms of the potential for return on investment on this, and you ran through a number of different figures in terms of different types of return on the investment that we're putting in. So we're talking about the £144 million worth of capital. We'll go into that in a bit more detail in a moment. You also talked about, depending on what solution comes forward in terms of the public realm, might return a greater or lower return on that investment. Just to be clear, at the moment we know that the figures going in are 144 million. What is the total return on investment as things currently stand? So going back to the point that Assembly Member Garrett, the Chair, was asking at the start, what is your expectation?
Yeah, thank you, Assembly Member Mahfouz. And again, just to clarify, the figures I quoted earlier are per annum. So those numbers were just per annum. So when you start actually forecasting this out, say, to a 10-year horizon, you are talking substantial numbers. So if we just take the GLA economics forecast, for instance, and we start looking at it over a 10-year period, we're looking at £800 million increase in GVA. We're looking at £300 million increase in VAT receipts, over £100 million in additional business rates. So the figures are substantial, and that's just the pedestrianisation element, by the way. So that's just the GLA economics piece just focuses on what pedestrianisation could unlock. What we haven't factored in yet is some of the stuff that I was mentioning earlier around land value uplift, around some of the additional investment that may come forward from existing retailers, existing landowners, other occupiers. There's a huge commercial office pipeline that's coming forward as well. I'm reliably told that a lot of that is to do with the confidence that the creation of this MDC is generating. As you all know, there's a real sort of flight to quality when it comes to commercial office space in London at the moment. So, and with the sort of passenger numbers that you get on Oxford Street, 200 million annual passengers a year, which, by the way, to put that in context, Heathrow Airport gets 85 to 90 million passengers a year. Just to give that context in terms of the scale we're talking about here. I think when you factor all of those things in, the numbers that GLA economics have just attributed to pedestrianisation could be substantially greater in terms of return on investment. And in particular, going back to the point I mentioned earlier, the benefit to the Exchequer, UK PLC. This is a nationally significant economic asset that we're talking about here. And to link that back with the questions around local stakeholder engagement, the thing I would say about that is it's important. It's not just about the one-off consultation, stakeholder engagement that TfL did. We will have regular ongoing dialogue with local residents, and will ensure that their views are sort of fed in as we go through this. So I think this, just to give you that additional sort of context, we are talking about a huge economic return on the pedestrianisation scheme alone, never mind the wider stuff.
Yeah, if either yourself or Adam have a figure of every pound that's being spent currently, what that return will be annually, that'd be really good if you could share that perhaps this morning, if not later. Just in terms of that, given global events at the moment, for want of a better terminology on that, do you feel that will impact either in the short term or longer term in terms of the expectations of the return?
I think it would be prudent, again, going back to the risk register that I referred to earlier, I think it would be prudent to factor in some of the implications of the events at the moment. My experience, particularly working on region schemes previously, and particularly thinking about the energy spike-related inflation costs that occurred after the pandemic, was it did lead to a rise in supply chain, material costs, in energy costs, etc. So all of that at the moment, what's going on, we're following very closely what the Bank of England will be saying later today, and that will all be factored into our modelling and our risk management.
Yeah, so it'd be really good to know what your current figures look like and what they might look like after this afternoon's announcements on. You've clearly been speaking a lot with local businesses and in terms of your engagement in the last few months since taking on the role. One of the key things that I think hopefully everyone around the table would agree is we're on the same side on, is that this will, you talk about additional job creation, and actually locals will massively benefit from that. Having worked in Westminster myself, I know that many of the people who work on Oxford Street live in Westminster, in which many of those parts of the borough are impoverished, and actually those are fantastic jobs and careers for people on their doorstep. What is your expectation in terms of the impact of this on local people being able to get additional jobs?
Again, yeah, I mean, very, very important question, and that will be at the heart of it. And this is where the LPA function really comes into its own. Local planning authority function comes into its own, because we will have the ability, as development proposals come forward, to ensure that the Section 106 agreements that we negotiate with developers, we can be hyper-specific in terms of the kinds of jobs that we want. And we want local residents to benefit from. So I think that's where the local planning authority function really comes into its own, in giving us that additional lever to not only sort of capture these jobs at a high level, i.e. 731 jobs just created from the GLA forecast, but actually to start to shape the type of jobs that we want to see, and how we get that sort of pipeline of local residents into those jobs to benefit from what we think are going to be well paid, well-paid, highly skilled jobs that hopefully local residents can benefit from.
So that particularly might be around some of the office space potentially as well. But I think, delighted to hear earlier. Sorry, go on. Just on the office space bit first. Yeah.
So it'll be both during the sort of construction phase. We hope those opportunities can go to local residents. And again, my previous experience in my previous local authority, we were able to do that, ensure there was a high proportion going to local residents during the construction phase, but also the end phase, the end use jobs as we call them. So yes, that may be in the offices, that may be in the retail, that may be in the leisure, depending on what the development is.
So I heard, obviously, earlier you said Warner Brothers with a fantastic, key flagship store that are looking to bring into Oxford Street, which is phenomenal. Even better from my point of view as a Liverpool fan, we've got Liverpool FC setting up their first store outside of the great city up north. Are you already having conversations with them about how those jobs would be allocated to, or proportion of those would be allocated to local people as well?
Yeah, so I mean, we welcome that investment. Is the first thing I would say. It's a real sign of confidence in what we're doing. So we welcome that. The early conversations we've had with Warner Brothers in particular has been around more the sort of LPA function, how some of the transfer of activities will take place. So that's been around that. But as we get into more detail, yes, absolutely, we'll be talking to them about local opportunities and how we can maximise those.
And just last question around the monitoring framework. Again, the chair had raised earlier something that the oversight committee, which I chair, had contacted you about, to say actually, the last time we spoke with the Development Corporation, it was very much about making sure that you are clear about what those targets are, and obviously the earlier the better. May does sound like that's very close to the end date of the introduction of the first section of closure, which is late August. But you must have a very clear indication as to, in your head, as to what that currently looks like. Can you give us some flavour as to what that is, and also, what sort of figures you're going to be attaching to that?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, just to be clear, May is when it's going to board at the moment. Primarily because actually the April board is likely to be cancelled because of pre-election period, etc. Otherwise, we would have taken it to the April board. We already have we have the monitoring framework set up, so I think we as a team are quite clear on the metrics that we need to be tracking. And it's important we set the baseline out from start. And this goes back to the transparency point and the point raised by Assembly Member Garrett, that we don't want to end up in a scenario where at the end of this we are looking back saying, well, this is what we wanted to achieve. We want to set out from the off. These are the metrics we're going to track. This is the outcome that we want to achieve, and then we're able to track them. So to give you a flavour, on the sort of on the economic impact, it'll be the usual stuff around GVA increase, uplift in retail revenue on Oxford Street, reduction in vacancy rates, the usual sort of economic metrics. Any sort of robust economists would use. On the environmental front, it will be improvements to air quality for obvious reasons. On the sort of pedestrianisation element, it will be footfall, how many people are actually increasing. There'll be transport, there'll be TfL, I'm sure, metrics as well that will plug into that. And of course there'll be crime and safety ones as well, just to ensure that we have that rounded view. So it goes back to this is not just a transport scheme. This is a holistic regeneration of the entire street and the wider district actually. So we'll be capturing all of those metrics in one monitoring framework. It'll be published externally, and that will be what we are held to account against.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Just on that, by the way, when you're talking about measuring the impact, I assume you won't narrowly just be measuring the impact of things like safety and air quality on Oxford Street itself, because obviously the entirely foreseeable impact is you displace traffic just those roads to the north through that new corridor. I assume you'll include that in your analysis as well of the impact.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, that will certainly be taken into account. For me, it doesn't make sense just to keep it narrow, especially when you're thinking about wider. And again, just to be clear, although we've got a red line very clearly defined for the MDC and the MDA, we very much see ourselves as being part of a much broader and much wider West End. So it's important for us to capture exactly the change that's taking place across the piece.
Okay, good. So we now move to our next section, which is on funding and revenue. Assembly Member Hall.
Thank you. These questions, please, for Adam. Thank you. How confident are you that commercial income will generate sufficient revenue to eventually cover the OSDC's operation costs, the financing of borrowing, and, of course, the repayment of borrowings?
I think it's too early to make a view on commercial income and funding. There are a huge number of variables that will affect the level of income that can be generated. I think there are some areas where we would have greater confidence, such as the advertising revenue, but a lot of this is around engagement with stakeholders and agreeing a commercial strategy, which is one of the key priorities for the first year of the OSDC.
Oh, I really expected something a little bit more boisterous and positive there. So when would you expect the OSDC to operate without ongoing GLA revenue support? And what will be the maximum level of accumulated GLA support in the medium to long term?
Again, I think we need to agree the funding strategy first, otherwise we're making forecasts without a hard evidence base that sits behind those numbers. And a lot of these numbers will depend on the nature of the scheme that's designed and how that works with the stakeholders and that we're working with on the OSDC project.
Oh. Your budget submission, page 5, shows an 8.1 budget gap over 27-29. What are the actual causes of that?
We have, in the budget submission, what you can see is that the base operating running costs of OSDC are fairly consistent. What accelerates over time are the interest and financing costs as the capital expenditure is ramped out. So that's what's driving the initial gaps in the budget position. At present, there are no assumptions on commercial income, no assumptions on advertising included in the budget, and we would expect those contributions to bridge those initial gaps. The question is how much will be there over the longer term for the scheme in terms of the full 15-year costs of funding the capital expenditure. That's the element that the commercial strategy will need to finalise as we go through the year.
I don't understand how it can come about that a brand new MDC this early on, surely you would taper your expenditure and borrowing expectations to the funding that you know you'll get.
I think the borrowing follows the capital expenditure in the scheme and the delivery timelines for rolling out the pedestrianisation of Oxford Street and the urban design that goes with it.
You see, when the Mayor was asked about this in January's plenary meeting, his Chief of Staff said that he didn't recognise the number of the gap. So had you not told them about it? Why did he not recognise that?
I can't comment on those answers, but what the budget submission is based on prudently allowing for the financial support that is agreed and is there, and we will develop the revenue-raising assumptions in line with the commercial strategy as we develop that through the year.
I was somewhat hoping it was built on something other than sound, by the sound of it. I mean, what discussions have you had with the Mayor and his team about the budget gap? Do you think that you'll get extra business rates to cover it? What are your thoughts?
There's a 3-year budget commitment of £18 million per annum. That gives sufficient time for the OSDC to be set up, for the expertise to be recruited into the OSDC, both in terms of the board and the commercial director, and the priority for that first year will be to agree the fundraising strategy that will support the ongoing OSDC finances.
Can you put the microphone slightly nearer you, if you
Sorry.
would? That's all right. I'm having trouble hearing you. So do you actually have any plans to look at revenue-raising measures from the businesses in the area, such as via a business rate supplement or anything like that?
There will be a commercial engagement strategy. There will also be income that will be generated through advertising revenue on Oxford Street. That we have had some initial feasibility studies done, and there, as ever, there will be a range of incomes generated from advertising, depending on the nature of the scheme and depending on the level of advertising and the type of advertising that's installed on Oxford Street. That could range from anything up to £25 million per year, which would be sufficient to fund the ongoing operating costs of the Oxford Street Development Corporation and make a contribution to the capital costs. But as ever, those numbers will need to be finalised once the scheme design is agreed and once we're clear about what that advertising revenue will actually be.
Yeah, because it's not clear at all, is it? What contingency arrangements are in place if commercial income is delivered later than expected or at a lower level than projected?
If there's a reduction in or we don't achieve sufficient commercial income to fund the full costs of the scheme, then the board of the OSDC, in consultation with the mayor, will consider how to approach those issues. So there are elements in the capital spend where there's scope to scale up or down in terms of the urban design of Oxford Street. So there will be dialogue with stakeholders around the scheme design and the level of funding available and what's achievable within an affordable budget.
So, given the GLA and the LLDC's miserable failure to secure a sponsor for the London Stadium, despite years of trying and of us, particularly on this committee, nagging and inquiring, how confident are you that things will be different for the OSDC?
I think for the OSDC, as Nabil has already set out, the economic report suggests quite substantial increases in turnover within the Oxford Street area. So there's a real drive for the local economy for the scheme to succeed, and that will benefit the commercial businesses in the area. So I think that our engagement with those businesses as we go through developing a commercial strategy will be the basis for ensuring their support, because the interests of both the mayor and businesses in Oxford Street are aligned on the success of this scheme.
You see, some of us are very concerned, quite rightfully. I mean, the GLA Group has failed to maximise the commercial potential of its loss-making Olympic Park, loss-making Olympic Stadium, loss-making public affairs company, and has 2 existing mayoral development corporations that receive tens of millions of pounds a year in operating grants and paid for capital borrowing costs. I mean, obviously you don't agree, but I mean, many of us are very, very concerned that this is just another one. We're going to get in even more debt over this.
I can't comment on LLDC, but I think the benefits, the rationale for the OSDC being set up and the economic benefits of ensuring that Oxford Street is regenerated are quite clear. They might be difficult to quantify in exact terms at this point in time, but I think it's clear from the work that's been done that there will be a general uplift, and that will help to support the scheme and the wider public finances.
Yeah, we had similar stories on the other two. I've sat on this committee, I think, for 9 years and heard excuse after excuse as to why it doesn't wash its face. So going forward, I shall be interested to see, but we do not have a good history with MDCs. Thank you, Chair.
Assembly Member Roberts.
Assembly Member Hall just asked my question, which is that's fair enough. I think.
Assembly Member Mahfouz. No, okay. In that case, a couple of quick questions from me on the budget. I suppose it's really continuing some of the questions we've just been looking at. So if you look at in your draft budget, so table 4.1 is your revenue projections, which go out to 28-29, and then the 5-year capital spending plan goes out to 2030-31. So if we look at, you're basically looking at something like £14 million a year, what you're calling net service expenditure, so the sort of revenue cost. Then there's also the capital funding costs, so that, in other words, the debt interest and repayment for what is fundamentally a debt-funded plan. That keeps rising to nearly 14 million by 2030-31. So that seems to me that if you take your sort of 14-ish million a year of revenue spending and you add on by 2030 about 14 million of debt carry cost, you're looking at something like 27 to 28 million pounds a year to wash its face. And the plan is obviously to cover that cost through commercial activation, sponsorship, advertising of various sorts. But so far, there's literally £0 and 0 pence of that has been found, and that is quite alarming to me. So, you know, how is it? I mean, perhaps it's a question really for Nabil. How is it that we're quite a long way into this project now, and literally not one single commercial sponsor has come forward?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I wouldn't quite agree with your characterisation about us being quite a long way into this project. The Development Corporation was only incorporated on the 1st of January. I've only been in post 3.5 weeks, and I think we've moved at rapid pace in terms of putting in place all the foundations that an organisation, a startup organisation needs, i.e. setting up a team, i.e. bringing forward a decision on pedestrianisation, i.e. launching our website, launching our brand, setting up a board. We're currently out to recruit for an independent planning committee. That's extraordinary pace we're moving at. So I wouldn't quite characterise it in terms of the way you have around us being quite far down the line. Actually, we're quite an infant organisation still. And I think given that, I think it's reasonable that we are, as Adam has said, we need to work through our commercialisation and our income generation approach. But where we are at the moment, I'm confident for the next 3 years, we've got the base budget there to allow us to forward fund and be the cornerstone investor and attract in sponsorship and attract in private investment as we work out what our commercialisation strategy will be.
Yeah, I suppose my thought process was that what attracts a commercial investor isn't, you know, having a legal entity or a subcommittee to look at the commercialisation or what have you. It's, you know, if I were running this, I would think, what's the key plan? The key plan is to get your principal, which is the mayor, in front of these people in a room, telling them how wonderful it's going to be and selling, you know, the project. And obviously, we're now 18 months on from September 2024 when this was announced, and there have been multiple announcements from the mayor over that period. And every single one of those would have benefited from an announcement from the mayor's point of view, from an announcement that, and we can say that company X or company Y is now on board for X million pounds and they're putting their own money into this project. And you know, it's pretty obvious when you read the mayor's material and some of your material that those conversations with business have been happening for quite a long time. You know, and obviously the mayor was thinking about this before September. He didn't wake up on September and just suddenly announce it. So we're well over 18 months in. That's the timeline I'm thinking about. And so far, the mayor has obviously not found a single commercial supporter. I mean, you're right that you've only been here a few weeks, but that's my concern, is that we're 18 months in from the mayor's point of view, and he hasn't found anybody yet.
Again, I wouldn't quite characterise it in the same way. I think it's important. What I hear from investors...
Which bit of what I've said is wrong? So the date of the announcement is correct, and the amount of money gathered so far is correct. So
in terms of what?
Disagreeing with. So it's 18 months since the announcement, and it's £0 so far in commercial sponsorship.
The bit that I would the bit that I would disagree with is what investors want. In my experience, what investors want is clarity. Is the first thing, and we're giving that now. So the MDC is in place, we are established. The committee, the planning committee, I wouldn't underestimate the importance of that, because that sets out exactly how we're going to be making decisions on things like the public realm, on the type of buildings that come forward, on the built environment form that we want to create. I think establishing a local plan is hugely important. That's what investors want to hear from. The conversations I've been having with investors, that's what they want. They want clarity that the policies that we're going to be bringing forward are going to be applicable in a sort of consistent manner, and actually that's the most important thing. So I think those commercialisation sponsorship discussions will only start in earnest now. So I think it would be perfectly reasonable to assume that even though the mayor announced his intention back when he did, it wouldn't be until the Development Corporation is in place and is able to take forward some of the delivery mechanisms that actually those sponsorship conversations start in earnest and in a serious way.
Got you. So I'm a bit worried you're not worried. At what point, when it remains zero or very low, would you start to be worried?
No, again, I wouldn't characterise it like that. I wouldn't say I'm not worried. It's a risk.
No, that's what I'm saying. I'm worried.
Yeah.
You're not worried. Okay, so that's the status quo. 6 months from now, a year from now, 18 months from now, if there's still little or no commercial money on the table, at what point do you join me in team worried?
It's team worry. It's a risk. It's a risk that needs to be captured, and it's a risk that needs to be mitigated. It's something I'll be working through with the board to ensure that we have the plans in place to allow us to respond as an organisation. But at the moment, just going back to the original point, I think the organisation is very, very young, and we need to put in place all the foundations to set us up for success in 6 months' time, 9 months' time, 18 months' time. That's been the focus. It's only been incorporated for, what is it, coming up to 2.5 months or so. So I don't think at this point it would have been the priority for the Development Corporation, but it will become so.
Okay. I mean, I would have thought it was a priority because that's the basis of your entire business plan is to not have to be taking taxpayer money and instead to be funded by commercial support. But
as I said, the priority at the moment has been to set up the Development Corporation. So we shouldn't underestimate how much work that takes and how much headspace that incorporates. But that's not to say we're not taking the commercial strategy seriously. As Adam said, that needs to be developed very quickly. And actually, as part of my 100-day plan that I've agreed with the board, it is one of the key milestones in there. But just to give you some reassurance.
When is the milestone? Sorry, that sounded a bit like a date.
As part of my 100-day plan that I've agreed with the board, it is a key milestone in there to set out a plan how we're going to develop this commercialisation strategy. And as Adam said, we want to have that in place by the end of year one. So that is very much a key principle and milestone for us. But we have to set the organisation up in a way to succeed for the long term. So right now, in my 3.5 weeks, the focus has been to establish a team, to recruit the right people, to set up the local planning committee, to ensure the transfer of powers when they take place to local planning authority. We are ready. We are ready, and the organisation is ready, and that includes a whole host of work behind the scenes, data protection agreements, collaboration agreements with the 2 local authorities. We have to put all of this in place and, of course, set up the board. That has been the priority, set the, as I call it, the plumbing of the organisation up so that we are set up for success.
Okay, just then to end on a point of agreement, so we'll obviously we'll see how that goes. We have, as Member Hall said, we have heard stories of lots of money coming in on other projects, but there are other projects, and perhaps this one will be different. But you agree basically with my numbers that by 2030-31, the sort of annual funding requirement, taking into account expected revenue and the capital carry cost, is something in the region of 27 to 28 million pounds. So that's the gap, if you like, that you want to try and fill as much of as possible with the commercial funding.
That's broadly correct, yes.
Okay. And then final quick question from me. You were just talking about the setup. So I notice in Table 1, there's £700,000 of VAT spending for this year because it talks about being registered for VAT, but obviously the nature of the company, nature of the organisation is that it will be registered under Section 33 of the VAT Act as an exempt body. And I was just curious why that wasn't done already and why we seem to have just accidentally lost £700,000 by not getting the government to fill in a piece of paper.
I don't think it's anything that's been forgotten. We have to be established in order to be able to apply. The process takes some time. This is just the timing gap whilst the application is processed and we can start to reclaim that.
But when it's a government, or it's not a sort of HMRC thing, is it? It's a government piece of secondary legislation, just like the order that's set up OSDC. Could they not have just done the Section 33 order for exemption of VAT at the same time that they did the order to establish OSDC?
My understanding is no, but I can certainly go away and look at that.
What I would really like on that is a timeline of when it was asked for, because it just seems to me such a foreseeable thing. When did we, the royal we, when did you, somebody, not me, write to the relevant minister, presumably someone in the Treasury, and say, we're going to need to be a Section 33 exempt body? Can you set that up for us? Because presumably you could have given them lots of notice, because, as I say, September 2024, the Mayor announced his intention.
This is an HMRC process rather than a ministerial one. So we do have to go through the HMRC rules for setting the organisation up as a VAT registered body.
Is it not a piece of secondary legislation, though, to add it to the exempt bodies under Section 33 of the VAT Act? Is that not an order, a sort of piece, have I misunderstood that? I'm not an accountant or a tax lawyer, so I may have misunderstood, but my understanding is that it's a bit of parliamentary work rather than a bit of HMRC work.
Yes, that's correct, but we still have to go through the process of registering and applying with HMRC.
Okay. If you could let us know the timeline of that, because that just seems like a bit of a missed opportunity. Assembly Member Georgiou.
Yeah, very quickly, Nabil. So you've said it will be in your 100-day plan and obviously milestones for the sponsorship deal. Will this include a rough date range of when we're anticipated to have a sponsorship deal? I'm not asking you to get your crystal ball out, but I think the main underpinning of this project, at least this is what the Mayor sells it as, this will be a fantastic relationship between both the public and private sectors. And given that we've got £144 million of taxpayer money being pushed into this, you know, the sponsorship deal is obviously a crucial part of this. So I just want to probe a bit more further on the Chair's, you know, I know you're never going to say you're worried, but just within that 100-day plan, can we have some semblance of a timeline?
Yeah, thank you, Assembly Member Georgiou. I think, just to clarify, as part of my 100-day plan, what I've agreed with the board is we will set out the plan for the commercialisation strategy. I think it's important to give them that confidence. As I'm sure you can appreciate, the board are very keen to see this as much as you are, as much as I am, to get it underway. So that's what will be as part of the 100-day plan. I think just to also give you some further reassurance, the Mayor's office have been very clear to me that we need to come up with a strategy, commercial and fundraising strategy, so that these costs ultimately don't fall on the GLA. So that instruction, I think it was one of the earlier questions, what conversations you've had with the Mayor's office. So just to, again, for the record, that has been a very clear instruction I've received from the Mayor's office. So we are working to that principle. And absolutely, the milestones are going to be hugely important in us giving the confidence, not only to the Mayor's office, but primarily to the board, that we can actually achieve what we think we can through this.
Yeah, I don't really care about the board, because it's going to be flooded with people that just want to make Sadiq Khan happy, so their opinion doesn't really apply too much in this scenario, at least in my mind. So I think what would also be helpful for the purpose of this committee moving forward would also be in order that you don't worry and that you're sure of the future, just a worst case scenario, if that commercialisation deal doesn't come through, what the contingency plans are, and ensuring that it won't stall any parts of the project.
Yeah, thank you for the question, and I completely appreciate where you're coming from on this. What I would say is the board plays a really important role, very important role. I see it as a 3 lines of defence model. So we as the exec team are coming up with a plan. The board are our sounding board. They're testing us on this. They're sense checking. They're holding us to account. And then you come in behind that as the scrutiny to ensure that the board is doing its job well. So I think I wouldn't underestimate and downplay the board's role in this. And we have got some, we've got a real range of expertise and skills around that boardroom. And I'm very grateful that they are actually my board, because they are going to be crucial in helping us achieve the end vision of this. So I would just sort of like to say that. But on the sort of substantive point, the thing I would say about the sponsorship is it won't be a one-off sponsorship. That's not what we're envisaging. This is a global high street. There are going to be a huge number of opportunities that come out of this, some of which we may not even know yet. So I think part of that commercialization strategy is actually to go out and do some of that soft market testing, to talk to people who are experts in this, to learn from them, and to ask them what the art of the possible is here. So I wouldn't want to, and this is why the strategy development process is hugely important, because we don't know all the answers, and I wouldn't want to sit here today and claim to know all the answers. That wouldn't be appropriate. I think what we will do is we'll bring all the expertise, the insights together, form that strategy, and then following on from that strategy, we'll have a plan, and the plan then follows on from actual sponsorship discussions with potential commercial partners. So there's a very sort of ordered process to this. Develop the strategy, execute the plan, and then bring in the commercial sponsorship that we think this street deserves and will bring in.
Yeah, but you still didn't answer the question, Nabil, which was, will you present? And I appreciate, if you said to me, listen, Assembly Member George, we don't want to present a worst case scenario because it gives potential sponsors leverage in negotiations, I would say, well, okay, but it would make us feel more confident if that information existed even internally and if it wasn't public facing. So could you ensure that whatever you present to the Mayor's office or this Assembly, even if it's in a Part 2 session, that commercialisation strategy will include, if there aren't private funds to underpin or anticipate to underpin, how will the project look moving forward?
Yeah, thank you. Again, I think it's already captured in our high-level risk register at the moment, but you're absolutely right. We should be transparent about that, because this is public money at the end of the day we're talking about, and we are acting as a cornerstone investor with a view to attract and unlock private investment. And there's always a risk. There's always a risk that private investment doesn't flow. Not necessarily anything to do with the project, by the way. Going back to Assembly Member Mahfouz's question earlier, sometimes it could be wider macroeconomic factors that may come into play.
Look, Nabil, I'm not even getting into whether I like the project or not. This is just purely about the public finances. You don't have to be defensive with me. It's just simply, you've said, yes, we're going to have the risk register. It exists already, top level, but just more granular detail, even if it's confidential papers, private papers. It will good to know how the project moves forward without that private capital underpinning it. That's all I'm asking for.
Yeah, thank you. I didn't think I was being defensive. Just to confirm, that will absolutely exist.
Fine, thank you. There we go. Got there.
Great. Okay, we now move on to a section on the capital programme. Assembly Member Small Edwards.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for letting me join this important meeting. Good morning, panel. My question is to Chief Executive Nabil. Nabil, what is the timeline for the first phase of the pedestrianisation of Oxford Street? When do you expect it to be completed?
Yeah, thank you, Assembly Member. So the Mayor's been very clear. He wants to see the road closed off to traffic by the end of summer. At that point, we are, as I said before, still designing up what the transition scheme will look like. But I think it's fair to say there will be a transitional scheme initially before any permanent before any permanent scheme is established. And that's important for a number of reasons. One, we want to test. We want to use that time to test, because there may be things that happen in real time that we want to absolutely make sure that some of the assumptions we make during the design phase actually play out in practice. And so that transition scheme will be hugely important in allowing us to test what works, what doesn't work, take into account stakeholder views, adapt where needed, tweak as necessary. And this is really, really important. It goes back to the wider stakeholder ongoing dialogue that we hope to embed within this programme. So following the transition scheme, the permanent scheme will be put in place.
And what kind of metrics are you going to be looking at during that transitional phase, which will then inform that permanent scheme?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So the design principles we've been very clear about. So it's the stuff that hopefully everyone can agree upon. So inclusivity is going to play a hugely central role in this. We call it the nation's high street. We mean that. That means it needs to work for all, for everyone. Those that are less mobile, disabled Londoners, as much as anyone else. So all of these metrics will be part of the design principles, and that's what we will test against. Some of the detail behind this will come out in due course. So some of it is being worked up with the design teams at the moment. But we did present to the board a couple of weeks ago the high-level design principles, which are now publicly available. But beyond that, the designers are currently working on exactly what the sorts of metrics are that we want to include and then test during this sort of transition phase.
And how long do you envisage that transitional phase lasting?
At the moment, the last timetabling I've seen suggests that it could be up to 2 years, but a lot depends on the actual design and how quickly we can get certain things in place, how quickly we can manoeuvre other things. So a lot depends on the actual final design and how we land on it.
So is that 2 years of looking at the transitional scheme and then starting work on the permanent scheme, or is that 2 years of transitional scheme and work on the permanent scheme with the permanent scheme coming into effect within that 2 year period? Yeah,
so it could be this. It's all down to design, but it could be either, and it sort of depends on what design, the final design we come up with. But the intention would be to work at pace. That's the important thing, but not to put anything in place that we can't sort of take out and keep it as flexible as possible. So the intention is, and that's why we've got 2 design teams working on this, by the way. That's quite an important point. The first design team is working on the Oxford Street West proposal, but then we have got a whole street concept being drawn up at the same time, precisely for that reason. Where we can make elements of it permanent quicker, we will, and where things need to be a transition scheme for a bit longer because we want to test further, we will be able to do so. So we're keeping it flexible at this moment in time, but once the final designs are confirmed, we'll be very clear about the exact timescale.
I think one of the benefits is the level access you'll be able to have when you level up the road and keep it at the same level as the pavement which already exists. I mean, is that something which is going to take more than 2 years to achieve, or is that something we can expect within that 2 year period?
I shouldn't imagine that would take 2 years to achieve.
That's great to hear. Thank you, Chair.
Assembly Member Georgiou.
Thank you, Chair. Adam, what are the main risks to the £144 million Phase 1 capital cost estimate, and what level of contingency is built into this figure?
The detail, I might refer to Helen for some of the detailed costings here. So the scheme does have contingency contained in it. It has got inflation uplift contained in it, and there are the 2 principal elements. So the first are the highways alterations, and then the second part is the urban realm. TfL have been instrumental in pulling the cost together. This is their area of expertise. This is what they do on a regular basis. And Helen, I don't know if you want to say anything more about the cost build-up and the contingencies that are built into the scheme.
Yeah, certainly. Depending on the maturity of each phase, a different risk provision is allocated. So for the final design, the urban realm design that Nabil was describing, there is a higher risk and contingency allocated until we nail down the specific scope, materials, etc.
What's the high contingency figure?
Which is, I think those numbers are commercially sensitive, but I think we could probably cover that in a part 2 part, if that would be acceptable to the committee, because we do have the cost breakdown.
Right.
But because we haven't allocated contracts for construction, we can't necessarily discuss them in a public forum.
No, I understand that point.
Yeah.
No, that's good. Okay.
But happy to detail that in a part 2.
I mean, perhaps, I'm sure the chair can be in contact afterwards, and if we get those figures, that'd be helpful. How confident, back to you, Adam, how confident are you that the capital investment required will not exceed the sums cited to deliver your plans?
I think in terms of the end scheme cost, that is going to be driven by the final design of the scheme. So I think there are 2 elements here. I think the highways costs, we're far more confident that this is that there's lots of technical standards. This is an area where we're more prescribed in what can be delivered. And again, Helen can come in if she wants to add anything additional. So there's some quite detailed cost estimates behind the highways elements. The urban design element of the programme is going to be subject to engagement with businesses, engagement with stakeholders more widely. And whilst there are contingencies in that scheme, and we would hope that that is sufficient to fund a wide range of design outcomes, there are options if businesses want to upscale the design and contribute more, for us to look at the design principles behind that. But this is why some of the financial elements do need that engagement process, both on the commercial strategy and the design, and the engagement with businesses. To finalise the
How
scheme.
realistic is it, though? Because TfL and every mayoral development corporation doesn't care what residents or what the private sector thinks and just goes ahead with it anyway. So therefore, surely, and Nabil's going to come in, and Helen, I'm sure, will come in and vehemently disagree with me with that. And of course they would, because they work for the mayor. So therefore, I'm asking you, on that assumption that nothing is likely to change, and once we have the 100-day plan and what the broad design outlook is going to be, the assumption therefore will be that the capital programme therefore won't really change that much. So it should be a high level of confidence, no?
I am confident in the numbers
good.
that we've put forward, yes.
Okay. Adam, the other MDCs are notorious for seeing costs spiral for major schemes, notably LLDC's East Bank project, which is now budgeted at £721 million from the original £471 million. In terms of avoiding those challenges and expenditure hikes, what provision is in place to avoid, obviously almost doubling in that instance?
I think that we will be, as we go through the design phase, we'll be working with TfL, with their cost teams, with their advisors. We'll be looking at our own expertise as OSDC in terms of quantity surveyors and reviewing design costs at the pre-contract stage, and then we'll be reviewing the progress through the contract stage and picking up bidding numbers against the budget position, and we will adjust the programme if necessary, if we feel that is required to actually manage the scheme within the budget amounts that we've set aside.
Okay, thank you. And final question from me just on this. Adam, your capital financing costs are due to increase from 2.8 million in 26-27 to 13.8 million in 2030-31. Now, I know you've alluded to this already, obviously, as the scheme progresses. We've factored in certain things, inflation, current conflicts, things like that. In terms of keeping it, and once again, I know it's not a crystal ball because you don't know what the socio-economic factors are going to be 5 years hence, but what provision is there in place to manage those increasing capital financing costs?
There's provision in the core budgets in terms of contingency, so that there are elements within those core budgets to manage risk there. In terms of the financing costs, we've worked with Treasury colleagues at the GLA, so we're clear around the interest rate assumptions that sit behind those numbers, and once those funds are drawn down, they will be drawn down on a fixed interest rate basis, so there won't be variable interest rate risk at the point after we've actually drawn down the funds. And this will be a process of regular monitoring, as it would be with any capital scheme.
But what would be the loan period?
15 years.
15 years. Okay. All right. That's helpful. Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. We'll move on to our next section, which is looking at the transport elements of the scheme. And just a little heads up, we'll have a short comfort break at the end of this section. Assembly Member Baker.
Thanks. So we've started moving into this area anyway, so please don't feel the need to repeat anything you've said. But Helen, firstly, specifically, what transport infrastructure and operational changes from TfL are required to enable phase 1 of pedestrianisation of Oxford Street?
Can I clarify that phase 1 for you is the Oxford Street West section?
Yes.
Yes. So in terms of transport changes, there will be changes to traffic signalised junctions around the area. There will be changes to bus stops and bus standing areas, and bus routes will be rerouted as that was set out in our consultation proposals, and then there will be various phases of the reimagining of the pedestrianised space. Part of that will include some temporary provision as immediately after the road is closed, things like temporary provision for additional seating. We've referenced hostile vehicle mitigation to keep the pedestrians safe in the pedestrianised space. And then as the urban realm designs develop, that will transition to a permanent design for the street, as was Nabil responded to Assembly Member Small Edwards.
Thank you. So we've just had some discussion about how much you can currently let us know about the cost and contingency about phase 1. So is there anything you can tell us about the cost, both Helen and Adam, of those changes across TfL and OSDC, and if all of that is already funded?
So we have our project broken down into various delivery phases within that phase 1. The contingency costs that I referred to before vary throughout the different phases. So we have much more clarity around the highway changes as we're describing them,
yes,
and and specific cost breakdown. But again, we haven't awarded a final award of a contract, so we have early contractor engagement for the initial highway changes. So I think it's probably sensible if we set those out in a part 2 phase for the different phases, but we do have a full cost estimation for the scheme that sits within the budget envelope. And as the scheme progresses for the less defined scope, so the final urban realm, as I said earlier, we do have a generous cost and risk and contingency allowance because we haven't defined specifics around materials and scope. And that does enable us...
Is that about the urban realm stuff
the urban realm
than highway?
scheme.
Because
yes,
the highway stuff, presumably you know what that costs because that's what
yes,
you do. Yeah.
Yes, we do.
So just to clarify, so highway stuff, you know how much that's
Yep.
going to cost, and that's all funded. Some of the interim, the phase 1 urban realm stuff may be a little bit more flexible depending on what is actually commissioned. Is that accurate? And then you'll be able to share those with us
Yes.
at an appropriate time.
Yes.
Fine, thanks. And Adam, you didn't have anything to add on that one?
No, I just think on the urban realm stuff, we are in control of the design principles, and therefore there is a strong element of cost control that goes with the design brief.
Yeah, thanks. Helen, in terms of other transport impacts or potential transport impacts and whether there might be a budgetary impact. So have you factored in any potential congestion or traffic impact caused by pedestrianisation or associated roadworks? And have you assessed any potential cost of mitigation of those that might be needed?
So within the transport business case, we, as standard practice, evaluate the cost of any additional time for buses, any additional bus service costs, any expected change to passenger patronage across the network, and there is an economic assessment made of any traffic delays. Now, I don't know if the Assembly have gone into the very extensive detail that is on the consultation website that sets out the different changes in journey times for different modes of transport, but it is a very extensive report. But behind all of that sits a sort of cost of time assessment, and that cost of time assessment is plugged into the economic part of the business case and will flow through to the end business case valuation. So I can set those details out specifically. I don't have them here, but there is an economic cost or benefit put around all of those aspects to our transport assessment, yes.
So effectively, if there were if there was impact on ridership, bus ridership or congestion that was over what is currently being sort of factored in, there, at what point is that in the report? At what point that would then trigger OSDC or TfL to go, we need to put some additional money into mitigations? Is that sort of
so that's all part of the, that's all part of the valuation.
Yeah?
I'll hand over to Nabil. I think you want to say something.
Sure. We're just trying to work out when, if there are unintended impacts over what currently might be assessed, when that might trigger any additional requirement for
So that's all
Spending
been
on
accounted
mitigation.
for in the costs. So any increases. We don't pay for any changes to general traffic journey time, but we account for those in our business case assessment.
Yeah, but you might need to do something.
Mitigations, yes.
In terms of the,
Yes.
tweaking your plans if actually they've had in terms of buses or in terms of traffic management, if you find that has more of an impact than you realise. That's clear, yeah?
Would you mind if I came in there, Senator
Of
Baker?
course.
So no, it's a very important point, and I think it goes back to the point I was making about the importance of the transition scheme, how we actually test in real time. So we can make all the assumptions we like on the spreadsheets and the lovely Gantt charts I see, but actually there's something about real use, live
Human
feedback.
beings may or may
Indeed.
not do always
Indeed.
exactly what we
Indeed.
expect them to.
What I can confirm is the budget envelope is the budget envelope. So any changes that we need to that will need to be made following any sort of real life use cases that are coming back,
Yes.
we will have to sort of contain it within the budget envelope.
Okay.
But we will factor that in. It's already been factored into the budget actually, that there may be elements of potential changes that are required following us going live with a transition scheme and getting some of that real time feedback in.
Okay. Yep, I think that's enough for me. Thank you.
Okay, just quickly, actually, I should have brought this up earlier, actually, both Assemblymember Georgiou and Assemblymember Baker, you had discussions, Helen, about possible Part 2 or confidential information. You're very welcome to write to us. I think you've got our, the committee clerk contact details. If you write to us and just make clear in your answer which elements are confidential, we can make sure those can be shared with the committee but aren't shared wider than that.
Yep, brilliant. Totally happy to.
Okay, and just while we're just on transport, quick question from me. Obviously, one of the obvious impacts of closing Oxford Street to east-west traffic is that it all has to go somewhere else, and that includes cycling. And obviously, this is not it's not a surprise that that's an issue that has to be dealt with. And so I was a little bit surprised, disappointed that in the consultation, I think the wording says, we recognise the need to provide high-quality alternative routes through the area. This is for cycling. We will work closely with Westminster City Council to support the development of these proposals, which I think is a very polite way of saying we got nothing. So when will you have something for how cyclists can safely get east-west through that corridor?
Yeah, so there are already some existing east-west cycleways, and we know that because the areas north and south of Oxford Street are not heavily trafficked, a lot of cyclists use those quieter routes. But specifically, we have a range of proposals that we are working up with Westminster City Council. One particular one runs north of Oxford Street and is an extension of their cycleway, and I can't remember the number, so excuse me, which runs through Manchester Square, and they are currently looking at developing that. They also have some very early proposals, which we are still assessing for feasibility with them, south of the scheme through various routes through Mayfair. So I feel there's a comprehensive proposal. We're absolutely clear that cyclists will not be permitted on Oxford Street, and there will be measures in place to make that quite tricky, and I know that the committee has some concerns about that. But so there will be some provision north and south, and if those particular schemes are not fully completed by the time the road is closed, there will be a lot of advice and guidance that are given to cyclists about suitable routes to help them go east and west. And to other locations. The important thing also to say is that we're quite keen that if people want to cycle to Oxford Street to benefit from the pedestrianisation, that they have places so that they can leave their bicycles, and that we encourage that as well. So that is all factored into our design.
Okay, and all that work you've just described is going to be paid for as part of the project, not by the council?
No, that will be funded. So Transport for London has a borough cycling fund, which is part of the local implementation plan. We support many of the boroughs delivering their cycle routes through that fund, which is part of the wider Safe and Healthy Streets programme.
Okay, so that's money that Westminster Council could have had to spend their lip money on something else, but they're effectively are forced to spend it on this, aren't they, really, to mitigate what is not their project. It's a project imposed on them.
So their proposals, I think, were already well in train before this pedestrianisation was confirmed, so they're very supportive of these routes, irrespective of the pedestrianisation.
Okay, sorry, I had somebody, was it Unibil or Phil?
I mean, if I may come in, having been at a borough recently overseeing LIP programmes, it's never led by TfL. It's always the boroughs putting forward what their priorities for cycleways are. And I think the one that you're referring to, Helen, is Cycleway. I've got it 51. That's the planned cycleway. Yeah, just for clarity.
Okay, and you did say, sorry, just very quickly, you did say if they're not in place by the time the scheme starts, you're referring to this summer temporary scheme, presumably. I can't imagine very much will be done by July, August, will it, in this regard?
No, that's correct.
Okay, so it's really a sort of signposting exercise over the summer before any of these things really get up to speed.
Yeah, so Transport for London has extensive experience in providing what we call travel demand management. So if there is changes to the transport network, we will provide a lot of advice and guidance. Now, that's particularly in where there's temporary changes, so particular events or closures. But in this particular case, we will ensure that it's clear for cyclists what suitable routes are available for them through this area.
Okay, Assembly Member Roberts.
Thank you. Just on this business of the various schemes being the choice of the local authority concerned, we're entering an election period, and there are, I mean, it's no secret, there are certain councils which are up for play in May, and one of the ones which is being looked at closely is Westminster. What will happen to this scheme if there's a change of control at Westminster and the new administration is not minded to support this particular scheme?
Do you want to say that, shall I?
I'm happy to take that. Yeah, thank you, Assembly Member Roberts. Far from me to be commenting on what may or may not happen in May, but I think this is where the entire model of the MDC comes into its own, actually, because as a mayoral development corporation, it is a statutory body. It crosses political life cycles. It crosses political administrations. As far as we are concerned, any potential change in administration will not impact on the scheme proposals that we are putting forward at the moment.
But we've just heard that the cycle schemes are the decision of the local authority, not the MDC.
Oh, sorry, do forgive me.
If a new council in Westminster decides that they don't want to support the cycle scheme, then you'll have to find alternatives.
Sorry, do forgive me. I thought you were referring to phase one of the Oxford Street.
No.
Sorry, no. Let me pass back to Helen for that.
Yes, so this is something that me and my team work through every political cycle. The officers frequently remain the same. It's their responsibility to deliver schemes through the local implementation plan that deliver the Mayor's transport strategy. That's what the money is provided for, and we will work with them to address any concerns that newly elected councillors may have. And ultimately, the decision does sit on any highway authority as to what changes they make for their highway authority, and we would work with them to support that. And if they wanted to change those proposals, adjust them, or not progress with them, then we would have to respect that. But at the moment, those proposals are set out in their local implementation plan, which is a legal commitment to progress them if they are viable.
Yeah, but at the risk of drawing criticism from the Labour group and quoting Mrs Thatcher, it's I know, but it's officers advise and ministers decide. So you may still have the same officers, but the new council in Westminster may say no to this. So what's your contingency?
Absolutely, they may say no to that, and when they do, we will work with the officers for an alternative and a contingency.
Thank you, Chair.
Assembly Member Mahfouz.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to talk about my previous career as a professional footballer, but I'm not going to talk about that because it never happened, and neither is the same likelihood of Conservatives taking over Westminster Council in May. As a cyclist myself and somebody who...
Okay, settle down, everyone. Settle down.
I always get very excited. I get very excited.
I feel I do have to point out, this is not a party political broadcast
absolutely,
on behalf
absolutely.
of anybody. What was your...
So if I could come to the point, if I could come to the substantive point, so...
Okay.
No. So as a cyclist myself, and as somebody who I went to Oxford Street yesterday to check, what it's like currently, and I regularly go there. But I can't understand why quite frankly, any cyclist would be going down Oxford Street as it currently stands. The cycle paths that we are encouraging people to use, both in terms of cycleways and in terms of quiet ways, go around Oxford Street as they currently stand, and those currently exist. So there is nothing that's currently at risk from what we're doing in terms of proposals with Oxford Street in terms of cyclists. But obviously, I think we would always welcome in terms of additional, making the streets safer and improved signage for cyclists to know exactly how best to get around our great city.
Sorry, that was more of a statement than a question. Well, then let me make the statement that as I've cycled along Oxford Street many times, and the reason for doing it is because it's a fast and convenient way to get east and west through the West End. All that being said, it's now 11:30. I'm going to take a short 5-minute adjournment for our comfort break, so we will resume at 11:35. Thanks, everyone. Hello and welcome back to this morning's Budget and Performance Committee, where we're looking at the Oxford Street Development Corporation. We now move on to a section on accessibility and safety with Assembly Member Roberts.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. This is a question for Helen. It's regarding accessibility and safety, as you know. So, how have the accessibility requirements associated with pedestrianisation been reflected in the current programme? And when I say accessibility, we're talking about disabled access, etc.
Yeah, thank you for your question. So, accessibility and making sure that Oxford Street and the pedestrianisation scheme is welcome to everybody, regardless of their protective characteristics, is a key objective of the scheme. And in terms of the transport accessibility issues, we have undertaken a very thorough equalities impact assessment, again published online if anybody is interested in reviewing that, which sets out all of the issues that we have considered in coming forward with this phase of the project. That also covers details of stakeholder engagement, a workshop that we did with around 15 stakeholders representing disability groups. And in that document are set out their specific concerns around the proposals. Now, we do know that there are some limitations for the scheme, particularly around the location of bus stops. And bus stops now will be between 100 to 200 metres from Oxford Street itself. And we recognise that. So our focus is to look at what those walking routes might be from the bus stops to Oxford Street, ensuring that working with Westminster to ensure that those routes are pleasant, free of clutter, roads are easy to cross, and that once somebody gets there, there are places to stop and rest if they need it. In terms of taxi access, I know this is another issue that has been raised in that taxis won't be able to drop outside the front of every shop. There is a net increase in taxi ranks and places where people can be dropped off at all of the cross routes that cross Oxford Street to minimise walking. We do know from many accessibility groups and disabled groups that the additional space, and ultimately when we complete the scheme, the level difference across that whole space will bring a lot of benefits. The overcrowded space make it very difficult if you're using a mobility aid. People with neurodivergent or sensory challenges find that very difficult and overwhelming. So creating more space in Oxford Street does have some benefits. But we do also recognise that there will be longer walking routes for some people, particularly if they are taking a bus. And that is all set out in the Equalities Impact Assessment. I think the last thing I want to say, and it might be sensible to bring Nabil in, is whether we consider with some of the shops and the Business Improvement District offering something akin to a shop mobility scheme for people who do need mobility aids when they arrive at Oxford Street. That's yet to be defined. I don't know, Nabil, if you have any further information on that.
Would you like me to come in?
Yes, please.
Roberts, yeah. So, I mean, Helen has very sort of comprehensively covered the transport element. I think just to sort of build on what Helen just said, and again, at the risk of repeating what I said earlier, when we call it the nation's high street, by definition, we need it to be inclusive to all. So that everything you heard Helen say, we're going to be embedding that into the design principles, and we already are actually. So, and it's going to be going a bit further actually. I know this has been a question from Assembly Member Baker in the past as well about co-designing with disabled and less mobile Londoners, and it's not an add-on for us. Can I just sort of reassure everyone that it's going to be a design principle embedded from the outset. But let me point to some concrete actions that we've already undertaken, actually. So in December, our design teams, both East and Hawkins Brown, held an initial working group session with the Independent Disability Advisory Group. That was attended by our teams in OSDC. It was also attended by TfL to really start to understand some of the particulars. That was the beginning of a sustained process of engagement. So again, you're going to hear me say this a lot. These are not one-off engagement processes where we're seeking to embark on. We're going to be having sustained dialogue with all stakeholders, and we've got a further sort of workshop coming up with the Built Environment Action Panel design review scheduled for later this year. So again, this will all feed into our design. I think the other thing I would say is the September event that we held actually gave us, again, going back to the importance of real-life test cases, gave us some great evidence, actually, of what good practice looks like. So, accessible toilets, wheelchair, ramp access, quiet zones, places to dwell, as Helen's already mentioned, accessible viewing areas as well, and importantly, British Sign Language interpretation throughout. So these are some of the things that we learned directly from the street, even a one-off event, and we're incorporating that into our sort of design principles. That is the standard that we'll be holding ourselves to, and the design teams are very clear about the need to co-design this with a multiplicity of groups. Helen's mentioned some of the groups that we've been talking to, but we're happy to send you a full detailed list of all attendees. But it's all the usual advisory groups that you'd expect: Age UK London, Guide Dogs, Thomas Pocklington Trust, Blind Ambition, Hair Equity, and so on and so forth. So quite a comprehensive list of stakeholders we're engaging with there.
Thank you. One of our regular, I don't know if the word witnesses is the right word, but attendees, guests, that's the word I'm looking for. It's Inclusion London. Are they part of the list? Do you know?
We can check that and let you know.
That'd be very good, thank you. And so what we're going to be looking for, we've got those 15 experts in their field, those consultees. They're going to be brought back on a regular basis as that established panel. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yeah, so the ongoing dialogue is in terms of the sort of programme of ongoing dialogue, is to be established. But I've been very clear with the design teams that we want this to be a regular ongoing dialogue, not a one-off consultation.
Thank you. And you mentioned accessibility, accessible toilets. I'm not sure if there are any of these within the Oxford Street area, but are you envisaging, if not, providing changing places toilets?
So again, we're hearing loud and clear, actually, through the consultation that we've done, through the TfL consultation, but also some of the engagement that we're doing as a team. We're hearing loud and clear the importance of public toilets in general, but also accessible toilets. So that is being thrown over to our design teams, again, to take into consideration as we design up our full plans.
Okay, thank you. Are you able, therefore, to give an assurance that accessibility won't get worse in the period straight after implementation?
Yes.
Yep.
The layout and the highway changes mean that the road will change. We know that certain people with some conditions find change difficult, so we have various groups that we can work with to support to make sure that everybody has the right information, that walking routes are clear, that where people can drive and not drive is clear, disabled parking, taxi points, etc., so that as we manage through a major highway change, we ensure that organisations and the people they represent who need specific information get the information that they want. That's an absolute top priority, and we do this across many of our highway schemes, working with particularly local groups in those areas to ensure, because this is a national high street, as it were, our focus is also working with some of those national bodies that represent these organisations as well.
Excellent, thank you. Just sticking with you, Helen, if I may, it's regarding capital provision for accessibility improvements, including provision of step-free access from street to platform at stations in Oxford Street, such as Oxford Circus and Marble Arch. What capital provision has been made for that?
Bond Street and Tottenham Court Road are both step-free following the enormous investment into the Elizabeth line. There are no current plans to provide step-free access at Marble Arch or Oxford Street. Both of those stations have been assessed, and it's considered to be an exceptionally high capital cost to deliver step-free in those locations. And because we have stations in the intervening spots, then we encourage anybody who needs step-free access from platform to street to use Bond Street and Tottenham Court Road.
Yeah, it's a hell of a schlep from Bond Street up to Tottenham Court Road if there's no step-free access in the interim, surely. And no buses.
Yeah, hell of a schlep is a sort
That's
of
a technical term, I believe.
is a sort of personal assessment, but I think the committee is possibly aware through other attendees around our step-free access programme. That isn't something that I cover, but I'm sure we can provide some additional information. But what I can confirm is that there is no capital funding set aside currently by TfL to deliver step-free at Oxford Street or Marble Arch.
Thank you. Let me see, where am I next? So let me see, the capital provision, how is that being funded between TfL and OSDC? I mean, 'cause there are going to be some improvements, if not step-free, there's going to be accessibility improvements, and that's going to require a capital investment.
Well, the capital budget for the scheme is with OSDC, and that is the 144.3 million that's included in the budget submission to the Mayor.
Thank you. And finally, what's the deliverability timetable for accessibility improvements, and how does this align with the ambition to make the first section traffic-free by the end of the summer? That's one for Helen. So all of the new bus stops, all the new taxi ranks, all of that.
Yep.
And more, of course.
So we are hoping to deliver all of the interim highway changes that are required by the end of the year. The bus stops will be delivered ahead of the road closure, so that at the point that the road is closed, the bus stops can, the buses can run on their new alignment. And there will be a phase of interim or temporary highway changes that will come forward immediately after the closure to support people. The specific scope of that I don't have to hand. So specifically changes around parking, for example, I don't have that to hand, but I can certainly go away and provide that after this meeting.
Yeah, Nabil?
I can come in with some of the detail there if you want, Assembly Member Roberts. So some of the enabling works we need to do, of course, way ahead of the closure of the road. So some of the enabling works around the bus stop removal and repositioning will take place from April this year. Just to confirm, and then there are other enabling works that are required that will continue up until the point that we actually close the road.
Okay, and could I just for assurance for those people who are going to be most directly impacted, that the road will not close until such time as all of the bus stops are in place as a minimum and as many of the other mitigations are in place as well?
Yes, I can confirm that we wouldn't be able to close the road for obvious reasons until the mitigations in place.
It's just that there are always slippages in these schemes. It's just the nature of things.
Safety is paramount, and some of these enabling works will allow us to put in place safety measures in order to actually close the road. So until these enabling works are done, we will not be in a position to close the road.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Assembly Member Mahfouz.
Thank you. Just very quickly, I mean, the whole project is effectively an accessibility project, isn't it, in terms of making Oxford Street West, certainly in the first phase, more accessible to everybody. We've heard about how it will impact on different groups in different ways. So some obviously find it more difficult to deal with change, whereas others will find it easier to cross the street and go from one shop to the other. At what point will you do an assessment with various groups to identify the benefits or disbenefits once the first phase is complete?
So we have a monitoring strategy and assessment strategy set out in our EQIA, which identifies all the different things that we will test. That will be a mix of qualitative assessment, so street walks, engagement with certain groups and stakeholders, and talking to a lot of people that use the street, along with some more quantitative data-based metrics. In terms, because this is a phased approach, it will be a phased monitoring plan. So we will do it throughout the entire duration of the scheme, including through roadworks. We know that roadworks and streetworks can be disorientating for some people, so it's really important that we understand that. And then usually for TfL, for a highway scheme, we do detailed monitoring for up to 3 years after a scheme is completed, fully completed, to ensure that it is delivering all the benefits that we've set out in the business case. So that will apply here, of course.
One of the things that currently puts people off going to Oxford Street is that it's overcrowded on the paving. Christmas is obviously the sort of crunch time. What would you hope, what would be your expectations in terms of this Christmas from the point of view of people who particularly struggle with overcrowded locations?
So the road will be closed. So the road will be set aside for pedestrians. There will be interim urban realm improvements, so additional seating, lighting if it's needed, and other design features within the space. And there won't be any works in place to bring forward the permanent measures at that stage. We'll be focusing very much on the Christmas period and enabling people to enjoy that and enjoy the street as per the pedestrianisation. But it will be a temporary finish, as it were, at that stage, rather than the permanent finish that the designs will be ongoing for. But Nabil, you might want to add more.
Yeah, thank you, Helen. I mean, just to add, Assemblymember Mahfouz, I think it's fair to assume that the whole pedestrian experience will be far greater than it currently is, because precisely to your point, we will have dealt with the overcrowding issue that is currently there, which actually doesn't make for a very pleasant experience for any groups concerned, frankly. So I think one thing we can be assured of is once the road is closed to traffic, it'll be a far more pleasant, far safer experience than what Londoners are currently experiencing.
Look forward to it. Thank you.
Assemblymember Baker.
Thanks. Yeah, it's just a really quick additional request, because I think we've slightly missed just making sure we get some information. So in terms of the public realm changes, really positive to hear commitment to accessibility and that you're going to share who you're engaging with. You said that it's going to be an ongoing process. Obviously, that's really, really key, because we can either get it really right or we could get it just slightly wrong and then it doesn't work for people. Can you share us what that programme of engagement looks like, as well as who you're engaging with? I think we slightly missed just asking for that. Is that okay?
More than happy to, Assemblymember Baker. The other thing I should have said is we have actually, as part of the board discussions back in February, we have set up a number of sub-working groups, as we're calling them, which will be led by board members. One of them is around stakeholder engagement, which will be led by our board member, Kate Willard, and this will be one of the work streams that falls under that. So more than happy, once it's all sequenced and once we've got our plan in place, to share that programme of engagement with yourself.
Thanks very much. With the committee, I assume, if that's all right.
Always happy to hear further information. Assemblymember Hall.
Thank you. Sticking with this before I go on to the next bit, when you're relocating these bus stops, you're not going to be putting in any of these so-called floating bus stops, are you?
No, so bus stop bypasses are put in where we have segregated cycleways, and the bus stops are moving to Wigmore Street, and there are no segregated cycleways on Wigmore Street, and no intention to put them. So no, the answer is no.
I'm glad the answer to that is no, because whilst this whole scheme is supposed to be around accessibility, if you're older and use buses, you've plainly said that there's going to be a longer walk to the area. If you're disabled, it's very disappointing that you haven't got step-free access to those other two stations. And also, it's going to be more difficult for people to be dropped outside their favourite shops, which is... It's very disappointing, because those of us that are very lucky and can walk easily and for a while are in a different position from those that can't. And I think that what the people in life we should be looking after are older people, disabled people, people with young children, and the extra walk, could mean a difference of them going and not. Are you going to be keeping an eye, once the buses are rerouted, on the extra time it takes for them to get from A to B? Because those roads outside the Oxford Street are going to be, some say, gridlocked.
So I think it's important to remember that the only traffic currently on Oxford Street are buses and taxis. So the full displacement that is not a large number of vehicles. And of the 5 bus routes that currently run on Oxford Street, 3 of them will run on the alternative route. So we don't anticipate significant traffic displacement. And as I said earlier, there is an extensive list of locations that we have evaluated through our traffic modelling, which gives a bit more detail, and we can make sure that the committee has access to that. But yes, we have very good bus monitoring data, and we will be studying it intently to ensure that the journey times remain reliable for our bus passengers. They are a very important group of our passengers, and our focus at TfL is to make sure that those bus services run reliably and efficiently through this area and through every other area. I just wondered if I could come back on the point around your disappointment around the accessibility. I feel that we've set out those negative aspects, and that's absolutely important. But I did want to call the committee's attention to the safety benefits of pedestrianisation. Oxford Street is not a safe place in terms of road collisions at the moment. In the last 3 years, up to October 2025, there were 80 people hurt in road traffic collisions on that street. So I think we cannot underestimate that the removal of traffic, whilst there are some disbenefits, and I accept that, and we will look to mitigate that as best we can, the benefits in terms of safety, in terms of reduction of injury and reducing that risk of collision with a vehicle between a vulnerable road user and a vehicle are significantly worth investing in this project, and that's our focus here.
Okay, so if you're monitoring the bus times, that will be published, will it, so we can all see?
Absolutely, yes.
Excellent. Right. So on to the safety issue. So I think, Nabil, you'll probably be the one to answer this. What assessment has been made of the policing, enforcement and public safety implications of pedestrianisation, and how have these considerations informed the budget?
Yeah, thank you, Assemblymember Hall. I mean, I think I'd build on what Helen said in her previous answer, which was around we shouldn't underestimate just how hostile an environment it currently is, Oxford Street. And actually, that's what the evidence shows us very clearly. This is based on evidence that we've been collecting, that there have been collisions and there is significant harm that's being caused from the current environment. And we shouldn't sort of compare that with the hypothecation that actually a pedestrianised environment will result in higher harm in terms of sort of safety and for vulnerable road users. So I think that's important to mention. In terms of, I'll come back to the design. The design is critical to all of this, and we are engaging with the Met Police and their designing out crime officers to ensure that the final design does take into account all the features that Helen has mentioned in her previous response, but also how we can ensure that this is a safe, accessible space for all Londoners moving forward.
Yes, because of course the West End, which includes Oxford Street, accounts for 65% of all the crime in Westminster. So I know you're talking about accidents as in pedestrians and vehicles, but I mean we need to look at the safety of people in Oxford Street. So what sort of ideas are the police giving you to change things in the street that would make people safer?
Yeah, the police will be feeding directly into the design discussions, as I said, and designing out crime officers have got good ideas about how we could make this a far more safer place. And some of those measures include just designing out particular corners, hidden corners. Some of them is around dwell time. Some of it is around natural surveillance. There will, of course, or there is already the new West End Company, and they provide some maintenance and policing, soft policing of the area. So all these discussions will be taken in the round, and we will have a comprehensive safety plan. It's important to us to ensure that the place feels safer than it currently is. And on the sort of West End crime stats, we are fully alive to that, fully aware of that. It doesn't. I must admit, 120 million people passing through a year. That is heavy footfall. There's no other street in the world that experiences that level of footfall. So we have to ensure that any designs that we come up with at the end does take into account the substantial footfall and the increase in footfall we're expecting as a result of our measures.
Will there be an increase in policing in the area?
there has already been an increase in policing in the area, and I think, as I understand it, that's showing that's driving a decrease in theft in high risk areas as a result of the investment that the mayor has put into additional police officers. The majority of those have been deployed to the West End. MOPAC and OSDC will continue to work with the Met. We're in, exactly as Nabil said, we've been speaking about to the new West End company about how the Metropolitan Police and OSDC can work with them around the new monitoring centre that they are setting up for the area that they're in charge of. So there is a significant, there's been a focus and an interest and a recognition of the importance of this from the start. Equally, I think, we have seen in the evidence in other cities worldwide that in many cases pedestrianisation leads to a decrease in crime because of the way in which these areas are able to operate, and to some degree because of the additional footfall that's generated and the way in which these become more user-friendly areas. But the conversations with the police are ongoing. The mayor's been absolutely clear that the design process has to engage with the police and to make sure that opportunities for crime are being designed out. But equally, he is already responding to the issues that you've raised and deploying additional policing resources into the West End.
Tell me, will the surface of Oxford Street allow for any very large vehicles like fire engines to come in? If there was a massive fire in the front of Selfridges or whatever, and you need some really heavy vehicles there, I mean, could they get onto there? Can the blue lights get onto that area? And have you discussed this with the fire brigade and the ambulance service?
Absolutely. So the current road surface is obviously for traffic, and the strength of that highway will not change through the work that we're doing. So in terms of being able to carry large vehicles, that's an absolute critical part of the design. There may also be large delivery vehicles, because servicing delivery vehicles are allowed into the space overnight, so the highway surface needs to accommodate that. In terms of accessibility, when the road is closed for pedestrianisation to the emergency services, we are working very closely with the emergency services to ensure that they are comfortable with our proposals for allowing, in the case of small or major incidents, the necessary emergency vehicles to reach either the building or the casualties that require them. So that will be people available to open up the any hostile vehicle mitigation barriers or any barriers that we have in place. We're working with the likes of Covent Garden. They're very well versed in this to sort of understand their approach to allowing rapid access to emergency vehicles in the case of an incident. So we're really confident that we have some good plans being developed with those emergency services.
Oh, good, because one of my questions was going to be, how would you stop people suddenly driving down the street, as we saw tragically a while back? The only other quick thing was, very often when you've got a big piece of flat land, you get these tents arrive everywhere. Have you considered how that will be dealt with, especially in that area?
Tents? Sorry, I don't remember. What do you mean by tents?
the homeless
I see.
Put up tents everywhere, especially in that area.
I see. Yes, no. So, look, we'll be working very closely with Westminster City Council and Camden Council, who obviously have quite a few initiatives when it comes to addressing rough sleeping in particular, and of course the mayor has other initiatives. So we'll be working really closely with the wider mayoral family, with the two local authorities, to ensure we put in place mitigations to help and facilitate.
Yeah, because it lends itself incredibly well to those tents that we've seen in Park Lane. The strategic lead for Westminster City Council told the Housing Committee last week that they were receiving no direct funding or support from you. Is this something that's going to change in due course or not? given the high level of homelessness?
Well, my understanding of, having been responsible for rough sleeping in the past for previous authorities is it's not always necessarily linked to funding. Actually, there are coordination measures that you can take in place. So we will be working closely with Westminster City Council and Camden Council to ensure that we help and we coordinate where possible. But at the moment, I'm not aware of any funding discussions that have been taking place between ourselves and Westminster.
That's absolutely right. And I mean, I think, in contrast to sort of the central reservation of Park Lane, this will be a well-used, busy part of the city. It is actively managed by both Westminster City Council and by the New West End Company, and the Mayoral Development Corporation will build on that. So it's not as though it will be an area where there will be, a presence available on that site throughout the day. There will be opportunities to intervene to support homeless people if they're identified in the site. And I don't think it's comparable to Park Lane in terms of the way it will be managed and operated. Though equally TfL has intervened to support those people who had been camping on Park Lane and to move them into more secure accommodation.
Well, we'll see. Thank you, Chair.
Assembly Member Roberts.
Thank you. I wonder, Philip, you might be able to tighten it up a bit, because you were speaking a lot about the West End. Now, the West End covers a large, piece of ground. So, specifically on Oxford Street, what additional policing measures, what additional resource, what additional is going to go in here, particularly for maybe the first 6 months? Because it may be that after the first 6 months, it's seen that actually there's no need for it. But to give reassurance in the very early stages, surely we'd be looking for an enhanced presence.
I can't give you that exact answer in terms of specifically what resources will go into it. But,
is it being given consideration?
It is absolutely being given consideration, and as I said, the deployment of those additional officers that have been funded by the Mayor has been targeted at the areas, the majority of which are within the West End, for all the reasons that we've discussed, where crimes affecting visitors, crimes affecting local residents in terms of theft have needed additional action, and where local people have needed additional reassurance. And so, as things change, we will look at those deployments, or rather the Met will need to look at those deployments to make sure that they're responding to those changes. And I think one of the most important changes we have coming up is going to be the closure of Oxford Street to traffic and its subsequent pedestrianisation. So, I can't jump in and say exactly how many people will deploy, police officers will be deployed to what place, but how we will make sure that the right policing is in place in that area is absolutely on our minds.
Thank you. We nearly lapsed into suggesting that the Mayor gets involved in operational decisions.
This is because I am not, in my day job, responsible for policing, and I haven't quite got the...
Thank you. Question for Nabil. I'm not sure if this was covered off earlier, but just for information, quite often in town centres all over the country, you will see BIDs, business improvement districts, employing their own private security detail to offer reassurance on various issues to visitors and to traders alike. Is that something that you're considering for Oxford Street?
Thank you, Assembly Member. So, as you're aware, we've got a very effective and very good bid on our patch, New West End Company. I'm pleased to say the Chief Executive of the New West End Company is actually an ex officio board member as well. So there's really, really good, close working relationship between the Development Corporation and the bid already. And there's been some really good early constructive discussions around how we are going to jointly manage the public realm and the wider environment. Nothing specific at the moment, but I think it's linked into the conversation with the Met Police as well, and we'll be. The thing that we're making sure is all of it will be coordinated alongside the two local authorities, New West End Company, and of course the Met Police when we come up with a comprehensive plan for the area.
Given that we are going to be seeing the roads closed and pedestrianised by the end of the summer, should this be something which is a bit more nailed down at this point, the ideas of security? Because it takes a while to get the contracts in place. It takes a while to get the enforcement operatives trained.
Yeah, thank you. Of course, New West End Company already has some of this infrastructure in place. The Met Police already has some of the infrastructure in place in the area. So just to build on what Phil said, of the, I think, 80 additional police officers that are on the beat that the Mayor has put in, 71 of them are in the West End. So, there will be a discussion with the Met Police around deployment patterns, etc. I think it's going back to my earlier response, the first 3.5 weeks for me have been around ensuring the stability of the organisation and setting it up for success. This is definitely part of the next phase of priorities that I will be looking into with the New West End Company, with the Met Police, with the Mayor's Office, with the 2 local authorities to ensure that we have this comprehensive plan in place. But to assure you, some of those things are already contractually in place. New West End Company already hire such officers, and there's already agreements in place between Westminster with the Met Police, with TfL actually, with the British Transport Police, I'm led to believe. So it's not as if we'll be starting from scratch. We'll be building on what already exists.
That's very useful. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Assembly Member Mahfouz.
Thank you. We've heard regularly this morning around hostile vehicle mitigation. Now, one of the most hostile vehicles travelling up and down Oxford Street at the moment are the illegal e-bikes that I use to snatch mobile phones, wallets and persons on. There will be no legitimate reason for why bikes will be going up and down Oxford Street once the road is closed. How will you ensure there is a zero tolerance to that once it's implemented? Thanks.
So we think the combination of the design of that hostile vehicle mitigation and the volume of pedestrians will make it actually exceptionally challenging for somebody to cycle on that street at any speed, let alone at pace. You will be able to push a bike along that street. And if you're using a bicycle as a mobility aid, then that will be permitted. But one of the things we want to do is to work with the agencies that will be policing the street to ensure that they support us with the enforcement. In terms of the dockless hire bikes, the providers, we are working with them to ensure that the appropriate geofencing is in place on those bikes so that a bicycle cannot be ridden on Oxford Street. So that's engagement underway. So we hopefully the combination of all of that activity will significantly limit or even remove that risk.
Really good to hear. Thank you.
Assembly Member Baker.
Thanks. Just on that, on dockless bike rental, what are you going to be able to do in conversation with the dockless operators so that you don't end up on the edge of where it's geofenced, just piles of them? Because we do see that around shopping. I mean, for instance, at Stratford Westfield, there's just sort of like a line bike graveyard down one of the roads. What's going to be done to make sure that isn't actually what happens?
So I think none of those operators want the reputation of causing significant
They're not doing a great job of that at the moment, are they? But yeah.
And we are working with them on that. TfL takes a zero tolerance to large numbers of bikes, and we will move them on, and then we will charge the operators for any costs incurred with that. And we will be very focused on that in this particular area because of the high volumes of pedestrians. So hopefully with our engagement with the operators, our own work to ensure that if there are incidences where there are collections of bikes that are causing an obstruction, we get them removed promptly, and our work with the any enforcement teams that are in that area, we will collectively ensure that doesn't happen. I can't promise it. We don't have full control over this, but if we do find problems, then TfL will intervene quickly and ensure that any costs that we incur are transferred back to the providers.
Okay, moving now to delivery and phasing. Assembly Member Small Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. I think it was a really interesting and important discussion we just had, and I think it's worth highlighting the 90 police officers we've had in the West End in the last year, which is really remarkable and great investment from the Mayor into the West End. And also the fact that £45 million has been freed up by the Mayor having Oxford Street for Westminster City Council to spend on other areas around the city. Moving to my question, so beyond Oxford Street West, what is the current long-term delivery strategy for the transformation of the remainder of Oxford Street?
Yeah, thank you, Assemblymember Smallwood. So I think at the moment I would say the focus is very much on Oxford Street West. We need to ensure, for obvious reasons, and a large part of this discussion today, that we get that right. We get it absolutely right. And I think once we've got a programme in place that is fully designed out, that is fully costed, we can start to move on to phases 2 and phases 3. So our intention at the moment is not to forget about that for obvious reasons, and that's why we've got Hawkins Brown doing a whole street concept plan at the same time, because anything that we do on Oxford Street West needs to plug into our wider vision for the wider area. So it's important, but the focus for the Development Corporation is on Oxford Street West initially.
And like you say, Hawkins Browns are already in place looking at the street as a whole. What direction have you given to them? What direction has the Mayor given to them in terms of what he wants to see on the whole piece? Because I think you'd agree that whilst they're being treated separately currently, this is ultimately one street, and the way people are going to experience it is one street. It's not Oxford Street West and Oxford Street East.
Absolutely. I might bring in Phil for that because he's been involved from the very start on this.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing to say is while the direct focus for this first phase of works is on Oxford Street West, we will be looking, or rather Nabil's team will be looking, at whether there are smaller scale parallel improvements we can do on other parts of the street. So you have that sense of improvement and movement and momentum along the street as a whole. And that's something that Westminster City Council have been particularly interested in as well, and will continue to engage with them on that. Alongside that, I mean, since before the Development Corporation was established, we have been in conversation with the Portman Estate about their aspirations for Marble Arch, and the Mayor's is very supportive of those aspirations. There are, we are keen to find ways to facilitate that where possible, and those discussions are ongoing and now being picked up by the MDC as well. And I know Scott Parsons, who's its new chair, is in close conversation with the Portman Estate about how those two schemes can be brought together. Alongside that, before the Development Corporation was set up, there have been really in-depth conversations with the Crown Estate about their plans to improve Regent Street and to make sure that these two schemes are brought together and align well and deliver a good result in their totality. And we've always been clear that the part of Oxford Street stretching east from Oxford Circus to Tottenham Court Road would be likely to be a third phase after you had made it to Marble Arch in terms of looking at options for pedestrianisation. There are some challenges around that part of the road, the street and the highway that make that make that perhaps more challenging than other parts of the road. But the Mayor's aspiration is still to in the long term, to move towards a pedestrianisation solution for that part of the road. But in the short term, we want to make sure that we're delivering improvements there. It's something that NWEC care about. It's something the businesses care about, and to make sure that there's a sense of improvement along the highway as a whole.
Sorry, if I can just come in on the back of what Phil said. So one of the early engagements I've got coming up actually is with the Crown Estate, is with the Portman Estate, to do exactly what Phil has said, just to build on their proposals and ensure they're interconnected with our whole street concept. So going back to the point I made earlier, we're not just treating this as a high street in isolation. We are fully aware this connects into the wider neighbourhoods, and we want to make sure as far as possible that anything that we design and that we bring forward plugs in to other schemes that are there. So Crown Estate's park-to-park scheme, obviously Portman's Marble Arch ambitions, but also some of the smaller plots of development that are coming forward. So I had a conversation with a developer yesterday who's got a current planning application scheme in, and they're thinking actually as part of the access to their site, they're thinking there could be some small public realm changes that could be made. And I've already said to them that their designers should be speaking to our designers, because it's all, as far as we're concerned, we are going to treat this as a holistic, wider Oxford Street district approach, as opposed to just the street in itself.
Thank you very much. That's good to hear. And it's good to hear particularly that you're liaising with stakeholders like Portman Estate, Crown Estate, who obviously have a lot of land holdings in the surrounding area. I think it's encouraging to hear that Phase 2 is envisaged as Marble Arch. I think the big win from this is probably a pedestrian corner going through Hyde Park, through Marble Arch onto Oxford Street. I think that's, the real prize on offer. And I think if we can get to that, it would be a real benefit for the West End, for London, for the country as a whole, I think. In terms of those later phases, when would costed proposals for that potentially be coming forward? Have you got a date in mind when you'd like to be presenting those?
Yeah, so this is another thing that the board have asked me to focus on as part of my initial 100 days. So as part of that, we will be thinking about exactly what that looks like, and we'll have more to say on it once we get to board in May, at the earliest, potentially June.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Assembly Member Georgiou.
Thank you. Helen, I'm going to ask a question not as a C-rate cheerleader for the scheme, unlike many of the softball questions that you've had today. What are the major highway utility or development works that are currently scheduled in the Oxford Street and wider West End area over the same period?
I don't have that information to hand, so we can follow up with you afterwards on that.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful to know, because what I've noted across London at the moment is that I think they're laughing because they're C-rate comedians as well, but we'll ignore that. I think one of the problems that we're finding with Thames Water in particular at the moment at UKPN, they seem to be tearing up streets all over the place at the moment. So I do wonder, what, and I don't know particularly about Westminster, what sort of lane rental schemes and things, whether they have one, whether they're intending on implementing one. Obviously, that may depend on the outcome of the local election. I don't know what the different parties are offering on that. But will we look into it? Because obviously, if there's simultaneous works going on, and I would assume there would have to be some sort of utility infrastructure roped into this scheme as well. So what are we anticipating?
So, as you'll be aware, the utilities have a statutory powers to dig up the road if they need to access their infrastructure, and TfL and all of the boroughs, as under our highway duties, have to give them that access. If it's an emergency, they have stronger powers to come in and fix that emergency, and that's the right thing for London. If it can be planned, then we work really closely with them as highway authorities and neighbouring highway authorities to try and coordinate all of these works. But that is not easy. I recognise that there are some challenges. There are a lot of works that are held to ensure that the disruption to the road network is minimised. And so we've got lots of examples where that's the case. Lane rental is really helpful in this space. So one of my previous roles was running TfL's lane rental scheme, so I know it very well. That really helps ensure that we drive utilities to take the minimum time and space for their works. And it also helps with coordination, because there are cost reductions if utilities partner up with each other or with the highway authority to do multiple works at the same time. So we would certainly encourage that. What I don't have to hand specifically is whether Westminster is proposing to put a lane rental scheme in. We are encouraging, and the legislation is now in place for boroughs to have their own lane rental scheme, so we can certainly confirm back to you on that. But in terms of the coordination of our works to deliver the scheme, we will obviously take into account any major works that are in the area, and particularly on any of our diversion routes that are in place. But as I said before, general traffic does not currently use Oxford Street, so it's more about whether any of these roadworks might be impacting our bus diversion routes that we would be most interested in the context of this particular scheme. But I might, if anyone on the panel is familiar with the GLA's infrastructure, I can't remember the name, team, because they also do this at a macro level to ensure that we're looking at these longer term plans of the likes of Thames Water and the utility companies to ensure that we can plan well in advance.
Yeah. I mean, I the Infrastructure Coordination Service is part of my directorate. There's not a lot to add over and above what you've said, except for the fact that they have a lot of experience, and they have some of the data needed to be able to sort of identify opportunities for joint working on street works, to help TfL and others engage with the utilities around timing, to deal with some of the questions that you're talking about. And we have the London Infrastructure Group, which Jules Pipe chairs, that gives us a mechanism to engage at really senior level with those utilities where issues, strategic issues of this kind arise.
Yeah, I think it is important because so many London boroughs are run by clowns, and they have leaders and cabinet members that haven't got the bottle, not just to implement lane rental schemes, but also they leave fines, money on the table from the utility companies, which we should have been clawing for decades, quite frankly. And also, I forget which provision it is, I think in the Highways Act, that actually does give the GLA and local authorities quite a lot of clout to say, speed this up, please. So all the jokers are at it again. There we go. As I said, C-list. So I think I don't know how the statutory framework that you'll have to basically have that same sort of power to be like, get on with it, don't take your time.
I can respond to that. So we are now the Highway Authority for Oxford Street, so that gives us the clout, and you'll be aware that TfL, because we run the strategic roads, that it's really important that any roadworks that need to take place on those strategic roads are done as quickly as possible and as efficiently as possible. So we have very experienced teams in roadworks management, permitting, lane rental, to ensure that we work in partnership with those utilities to ensure that their works are planned quickly on our network, and that we do that coordination, and we run sessions with neighbouring highway authorities to ensure that works on their networks do not unnecessarily impact the TfL network and vice versa. So there is a lot of coordination in this space. So hopefully that gives the committee some confidence that in this particular location we will really be focused on ensuring that we're not creating additional traffic congestion because of poorly coordinated roadworks.
Okay, thank you. That's great, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks. So we now move on to our final section, which we're broadly terming governance and powers. If I can kick off, Nabil, about obviously the other London MDCs in the former Olympic Park and out in West London, obviously they rely quite heavily for their funding model on housing development and the revenue streams that come from that. Obviously, there's less potential for that here because it's essentially already a built-out area. But how do you assess that potential, and what are you looking at as opportunities in that regard?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Very, very good question. You're absolutely right. Of course, we don't have the brownfield land that OPDC and LLDC have on their patch. But still, as part of a local planning authority, one of the things we will be doing as well, at the same time as bringing our local plan forward, is bringing a SIL charging schedule forward, and that will determine the developer obligations that we are entitled to as a result of any development that does take place on Oxford Street. And of course, developer obligations apply not just to housing, not just to brownfield land. That will any commercial scheme that comes forward for development will be that will be applicable to as well. So there are Section 106 obligations as well as SIL obligations that will come as part of any as part of the local plan that we develop. So we envisage that being an important stream to ensure that our team is sort of well resourced to deal with the planning applications that we're expecting, the volume of planning applications that we're expecting to receive, but also to ensure that we can actually help mitigate any impact of the development that takes place on our patch as a result.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about SIL, but it sounds like that you're confirmed that you don't yet have an exact plan, but you're confirmed that you're expecting to have a SIL plan.
Absolutely. A local plan development scheme, which is essentially our plan to publish what the timetable for our local plan will be, one of the early things that we bring forward.
Okay. Assembly Member Hall.
Thank you. I just want to endorse the comments from my colleague, Assembly Member Roberts here. The Mayor hasn't made an investment in new police officers. Police officer numbers are plummeting, so I'm happy for you if you've got 90 extra police officers, while the rest of us are losing them. Left, right and centre, particularly mounted police, transport police, forensic, dog units. I could go on and on.
Police.
Yeah, I mean, well, we could go on, couldn't we? And that's where those officers are coming from, just to correct the record. Right, so going to Nabil, how will the OSDC ensure alignment with Westminster and Camden's strategic housing and development priorities once it assumes full planning authority?
Yeah, thank you, Assemblymember Hall. Very, very important question, actually, and actually one that I've been getting a fair amount of from some of the local stakeholders who are obviously keen to understand our plans more. So I think what I would say is obviously the local plan, until the adoption of our own local plan, we won't be able to set planning policies for the MDA, and that will include appropriate provision for residential development. The Oxford Street area, of course, already contains quite a fair bit of residential accommodation, including above retail in some of the most commercially significant buildings on the street, and our planning approach will be sensitive to the opportunities for intensification and mixed-use development where these are consistent with the primary sort of regeneration purposes of the MDC. I wouldn't wish to preempt the local plan process by specifying any sort of housing ambitions today, so I think it's important that we take the evidence into account. But what I will say is in the interim, until we bring our own local plan forward, Westminster and Camden's existing policies will apply. But of course, I'm happy to write to the committee with further detail on the timetable for what I mentioned to Assemblymember Garrett before, the local development scheme, which will set out when we bring our local plan forward, the still charging schedule forward.
So what is your working relationship like between the councils and yourselves? I mean, particularly Westminster, because the mayor has trumped their well-developed plans that everybody seemed quite happy about and taken over the whole project. So how does that play out?
I would say the relationship with Westminster and Camden is nothing but constructive. We've obviously got the leaders of both Westminster Council and Camden Council on our board. So they sit on the OSDC board. We've got 2 additional representatives from Westminster Council who also sit on our board. There's really good operational work going on between the officer teams that are working in conjunction. Things like the enabling works that I mentioned earlier on in the session, they wouldn't have been possible had there not been good coordination work going on between our teams. So the fact that we've got those enabling works starting later, I think end of this month actually, clearly sort of demonstrates the working relationship. So I'm very encouraged by the working relationship that we have with Westminster and Camden, and we're in advanced discussions with both of them around the next phase of the programme.
Well, I wouldn't make too many plans because we do have an election coming up in a few weeks' time, and I suspect you might get slightly different views. I was of the opinion, or certainly been told, that Westminster, those that are running at the moment, weren't 100% happy about it, but I'm sure the mayor has had a word. How do you intend to demonstrate that you can act in the same transparent fashion as is expected from a local council once you assume full planning authority?
So this question came up. Thank you again for this question, because it is important to clarify. There are a number of misconceptions out there about development corporations, and it's helpful to clarify. So thank you for the question.
Some of the conceptions are completely right.
It's helpful to clarify the point around planning. The planning authority will function like any other planning authority across the country. So we will be subject to the same transparency standards, probity standards that you would expect from any other planning authority. It is an LPA. It's a full LPA with full local planning authority powers. At the moment, what we're doing is we are standing up our internal planning team to ensure that we've got the capacity, that the moment that we take, or the moment we assume planning powers, we can take on the sort of volume of applications that are currently sitting, live applications that is currently sitting with Westminster and Camden. So we're ensuring we're doing that, gearing up our team. We're putting the systems in place, including all the data protection agreements, including all the working protocols with the 2 host authorities to ensure that actually we've got the system in place, that the moment that we assume planning powers, there's a seamless transition for any applicant, be it residential, commercial, whomever. And then the final thing we're doing is, of course, we're currently out recruiting for independent planning committee members. And that's a really important point. This committee will be separate to the board, it will be separate to the exec team, and it will have representatives both from Westminster and Camden Council on there, but it will also have a range of independent members that have specialisms in regeneration, transport, climate, sustainability, and a whole range of other things that we think is really important to ensure that we are evidence-led in terms of the decision-making process around any future developments that come forward.
Okay, so my last comment to you, if I may, is this. Local residents are very, very unhappy about lots of things going on here. Lots of local residents have said to me they're very concerned about their safety in a pedestrianised area at night time, because many of them use Oxford Street to walk across to get to their homes, and I completely understand that. They're also worried about the tents, i.e. the homeless taking over, if you like, and they would move in during the night time. Local people must be listened to, because it's not just a commercial place. People live there. People have lived there for years, and the majority of them do not feel they're being listened to.
Thank you for that comment and observation. Of course, we welcome those views, because as part of the local plan process, as part of our any decisions we take around any development applications, we will of course have to take into consideration local views, particularly from residents as well, and that will not be any different to what Westminster City Council do at the moment, or Camden do, or any other local planning authority do. So that will be fully baked into our decision-making process. And I'd go a bit further and say, actually, as part of one thing that we're about to just sign off, actually, is we're going to set up a local resident group to feed into the planning committee, actually, to ensure that we've got that feedback loop in place. So it's not just application by application, but there's this continuous, ongoing, regular dialogue, structured dialogue forum that we've got in place that allows us to feed into what we are doing as an LPA. And I think that's going to be really important to capture those views that you've outlined there.
Okay, as long as you pay attention to what the locals actually think, because they're the ones living there, not the ones visiting to shop. Thank you, Chair.
You did just mention, Nabil, that you've got good relationships with the local council, and that the Westminster leader, among others, is on the board. Didn't he introduce himself to the board by starting saying he didn't think that you should exist, but since you do exist, he would sit on the board?
Yep.
I mean, people are allowed to have their views on this. What I would say is,
I suppose what I'm saying is you characterise it as a good relationship, and I'm saying if he introduced himself by saying, I don't think this should exist, maybe that's not as warm and rosy as we've perhaps painted.
I was characterising it in terms of my experience to date, and my experience has been nothing but constructive with Westminster Council politicians, but also their officers.
Okay, and then just also, we've spoken a lot about planning powers and so on. Obviously, the Development Corporation is a sort of planning body in many ways. Quite a lot of the things that you want to do will involve licensing powers, and there's obviously a discussion going on in the background about the GLA taking on licensing powers in some form. Have you had any conversations about that and how that might work?
So I may bring Phil in to talk about the wider discussions that are taking place, but as an OSDC, as the Development Corporation, we do not have licensing powers. Those stay with Westminster City Council and Camden Council, so we don't have that at the moment.
I mean, at this stage, the work on strategic licensing is about the broad overall policy on which we've consulted recently, and our work with MHCLG to secure the necessary legislation to take that forward and to understand exactly how it will work in practice. And alongside that, a lot of work on how we can deliver a service and improve the consistency of licensing decisions and approaches across London, and make it a better system for businesses and residents, and one that's easier to understand. We haven't we have talked about in the consultation, in the policy we put out for consultation, the idea of sort of looking at areas, I can't remember the exact wording, but kind of economically strategic areas where, the mayor might want to focus his attention in terms of the policy that he sets out, but we haven't got to a point yet of identifying exactly what those areas would be, or how that, or what specific policies would apply to them.
Got you. just back to you, Nabil, though, because presumably you've given this some thought, because quite a lot of the things that you want to do, like if you want to have, I don't know, street food vending and all these kinds of things going on in the street, activations and so on, that's quite quickly going to fall under licensing rather than planning. So presumably you've given that some thought. Have you made a pitch to try and get some of those powers one way or another? I don't know if it's even possible, but you know, we live in a world of possibilities, don't we?
No, thank you very much for that question. And I should say, of course, I've got prior experience of overseeing a licensing authority, so I completely appreciate the importance, actually, and what you can do in terms of placemaking when it comes with licensing powers. So I've not made that pitch. Let me just be clear. I've not made that pitch. As far as I'm concerned, at the moment, we're focusing on the delivery of the scheme, Oxford Street West, and we're focusing on the transfer of the local planning authority function to us. As far as licensing is concerned, we're going to have to work hand in glove with the two local authorities to ensure we take that holistic approach to the area.
Okay.
And I mean, it's probably worth just saying briefly that, you know, the GLA worked really constructively with Westminster last summer as part of our Summer Streets programme on their kind of activities and the way in which they adjusted their licensing policies around St Martin's Lane. And I mean, I hope we might, if they were interested, be able to have similar conversations about what you might do on whether this summer or another time on Oxford Street in future.
True. I would just make the observation that if the argument being put is that the GLA can achieve what it needs without needing those powers and they can work constructively with boroughs, I mean, that undermines the entire argument for creating a mayoral development corporation. But that ship has sailed. We now come to our final question, Assemblymember Harani.
Thank you, Chair. So, question to Adam, really about the timescales of the MDC. So, are you envisaging this being a temporary or permanent arrangement?
Sorry, can you clarify the question?
So, the MDC. So, looking at its, let's say, potential lifespan, are you looking at it being something that will be part of the GLA infrastructure permanently or temporarily?
There aren't fixed dates for the MDC.
I can't hear you.
Sorry, there aren't fixed dates for the MDC. It's been established. So I don't know if this is more of a question for you, Nabil.
Do you mind if I take that question, Assemblymember Hirani? No. So I mean, the MDC's goals are the regeneration of Oxford Street. So this goes beyond just pedestrianisation. Pedestrianisation, as I'm seeing it, is the first step. It's a significant step, significant milestone, but the first step. But this is about the broader regeneration of Oxford Street as an area. So no, there is no fixed end date that we're working with. There is, however, a 3-year review period that's been built in to the functions order, so that allows the mayor to take a view as to the effectiveness of the MDC and to decide on next steps.
Okay, and when will that? So has that 3-year period started? Or did that start with your appointment?
No, it starts with the incorporation of the actual development corporation. So that will be the 1st of January 29.
Yes, and I mean, as I understand it, the legislation around MDCs requires the mayor or whichever mayor has set one up to periodically review the case for their continuation. I mean, no MDC, as far as I'm aware, has ever been set up with a fixed end date. But we have seen changes. The LLDC a little while ago handed planning powers back to the underlying boroughs, and that reflected ongoing discussions with those boroughs and that kind of review process about what the future of that MDC might be. There will be similar review points with Oxford Street as there will be with Old Oak Common as well.
Okay, so there's no so in sort of any timescales you're looking forward to in terms of the medium term or longer term. Do you have dissolution? The MDC dissolving within any timescales within that? So
I think there will hopefully come a point where we can sort of say we've achieved the economic transformation of this bit of the West End that we're seeking to achieve. But that will be for the mayor to decide, a future mayor to decide as and when. What I would say on the wider point around MDCs, if it's helpful for some context, because I know, again, this is a question I've been getting a fair bit recently, is at current count, there are 9 MDCs across the country. And I'm told by the end of this year, that number is going to double. So clearly, this is a delivery vehicle that is being looked at as a way to bring forward regeneration. There's a number that have just gone live up in the Manchester area, and there's a number that are being planned around the Birmingham area in particular. So one of the things we will be doing is, as a sort of wider MDC family, if I can call it that, we'll ensure that we learn any lessons from other MDCs that are being set up, that are being reviewed, to ensure that actually it's not just entirely dependent on what we learn and what we see on Oxford Street or what we see in LLDC or OPDC, but we take that national view on how other MDCs are also progressing through their life cycle.
Yeah, so I'm just trying to envisage. So when you're, so I appreciate the answer that you've given me. So when you're looking at sort of forward planning or forecasting and looking at sort of the future, and I'm talking long term, and milestones, will you be working to develop, let's say, a 5-year strategy, 10-year strategy? What's the outlook in terms of how far into the future you are looking into?
Yeah, no, it's a very fair question, and one of the other early priorities I've given my team, of which one is sat in the audience, is to set out a business plan for us. So we'll start with a 3-year business plan, because I think that's prudent, just given that's the natural review period. But also actually there are elements that we can forecast that are a bit more consistent, given some macroeconomics that we're dealing with at the moment. But then as part of any regular sort of business plan, we'll take a forward look as well in terms of 5-year, 10-year, 15-year horizon. What is the possibility here? Of course, the further out you get in terms of timeframes, the less clarity, the less detail, but that's normal, it's prudent. Any sort of well-run organisation should be thinking along those terms.
Okay, that's it.
Thank you very much. I don't see any further indications, so that brings us to the end of our questions today. Thank you very much to all of our guests for attending, and it's been quite an interesting session, actually. It's a new thing that's being set up, so it's lots of new areas for us to explore, which I'm sure we'll be returning to. Thank you very much. So you're now welcome to leave. We've just got a couple of quick bits of housekeeping to finish up. On which note, can I ask the committee to note the report and discussion and delegate authority to me as chairman in consultation with the group lead members to agree any output arising from the meeting? Can I ask the committee to note the Mayor's decision list for the period 5th of December to the 31st of December 2025 and the 1st of January to the 12th of February 2026 and decide whether to highlight any issues for detailed consideration? Good. Can I ask the committee to note the quarterly monitoring reports? Of course. London Assembly's annual meeting, due to take place in May 2026, will decide which committees to establish for the 2026-27 Assembly year and a timetable of meetings for those committees. I think you're supposed to infer from that there's currently no planned next meeting of this committee, which is in fact the case. I have no urgent business today, so that concludes today's meeting. Thanks, everyone.